Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. It was the first week of January when we started clearing out the old evidence storage to make room for new cases. The climate-controlled basement was packed with metal shelves, each one sagging under the weight of decades' worth of closed investigations. I'd been assigned to catalog and relocate files dating back to the 70s, the kind of grunt work they give you when you're still proving yourself at the bureau. My partner that day was Agent Harlow, a 20-year veteran who'd seen enough to keep his mouth shut and his expectations low. We worked in silence mostly, the only sounds coming from the scrape of cardboard boxes and the hum of the overhead fluorescents. Around 3 in the afternoon, Harlow pulled down a box from the top shelf and set it on the sorting table between us. The label read 47B in faded black marker. No case number, no date. Just those 3 characters, handwritten in what looked like deliberate block letters. Harlow frowned at it, turned it over in his hands like he was weighing something more than cardboard and paper. "You ever see a box labeled like this?" he asked. I hadn't. Every piece of evidence I'd handled that day had been meticulously marked with case numbers, dates, investigating officers, the whole 9 yards. This box looked like someone had tried to file it without actually filing it, like it was meant to exist in a space between official record and oblivion. We opened it anyway. Inside were 3 file folders, each one thick with documents, photographs, and what looked like interview transcripts. The top folder had a name written across the tab: Evelyn Marsh, missing person, 1979. The second read, Thomas Keene, homicide investigation, 1981. The third simply said, Follow-up notes, R. Bishop. I pulled out the Marsh folder first and started reading. The initial report was dated March 14, 1979. Evelyn Marsh, a 32-year-old librarian from a small town outside Pittsburgh, had been reported missing by her husband after she failed to return home from work. Local police had handled the case for the first 48 hours before referring it to us. According to the file, Evelyn had left work at exactly 5:47 p.m. on March 13th. Her supervisor remembered the time because Evelyn had stayed late to help close up the library. She'd walked to her car alone, a blue Ford Fairmont parked in the employee lot. Security footage from a nearby gas station showed the Fairmont heading east on Route 22 at approximately 6:02 p.m. After that, nothing. The folder contained dozens of witness statements, most of them saying the same thing. Evelyn was quiet, kept to herself, had no known enemies. Her husband, Gerald Marsh, had been at a company dinner the night she disappeared. 23 people could confirm his whereabouts. He wasn't a suspect. What caught my attention was a handwritten note clipped to the back of the report. The ink had faded to a brownish gray, but the words were still legible. Check tape again. Timestamps don't match vehicle description. I showed it to Harlow. He read it twice, then set it down without comment. "What do you think it means?" I asked. "Could mean anything," he said. "Could mean nothing." I went back to the file. The next section detailed the search efforts. Local volunteers, state police, even the National Guard had combed through the woods along Route 22 for weeks. They'd found Evelyn's car on March 29th, abandoned in a rest stop parking lot about 40 miles from where she was last seen. The keys were still in the ignition. Her purse was on the passenger seat, wallet intact. $73 in cash still inside. There were photographs of the car's interior. Everything looked normal except for one detail that the investigating officer had circled in red pen. The driver's seat was pushed all the way back, far further than a woman of Evelyn's height would need. She was 5'3" according to her driver's license. The seat position suggested someone much taller had been driving. The rest of the Marsh file was a slow descent into dead ends. Leads that went nowhere. Tips that couldn't be verified. Psychics who claimed to know where the body was buried. By late 1980, the case had gone cold. The final document was a brief memo recommending the file be transferred to inactive status. I set the Marsh folder aside and opened the Keene file. Thomas Keene had been a 41-year-old insurance adjuster found dead in his home on June 7, 1981. The initial report classified it as a homicide, though the cause of death was listed as undetermined. I read that line 3 times before moving on. The crime scene photos were brutal in their ordinariness. Keene's body had been discovered in his bedroom, lying on his back in bed, arms at his sides, eyes closed. If you didn't know better, you'd think he was sleeping. But the medical examiner's notes told a different story. Keene had been dead for approximately 72 hours when his body was found. No signs of trauma, no evidence of poisoning, no clear cause of death. What disturbed the investigators was the scene itself. The bedroom door had been locked from the inside. The windows were latched. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house. Keene's last meal had been eaten 2 days before his death, the dishes still sitting in the sink. His car was in the driveway. His wallet and keys were on the kitchen counter. The strangest detail came from Keene's neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Dorothy Mills. She told police that on the evening of June 4th, she'd seen lights moving inside Keene's house around midnight. Not normal lights, she'd said. Flashlights like someone was searching for something. She'd assumed it was Keene himself, looking for something in the dark. When investigators asked why she thought that, Mrs. Mills said she'd seen Keene's car in the driveway. She'd seen the living room light turn on around 11:30 p.m., then turn off at 11:47 p.m. She remembered the time because she'd checked her watch, worried about whether she should call someone. But here's what made my skin crawl. The medical examiner's report stated that Thomas Keene had been dead since approximately 9:00 p.m. on June 4th. At least 3 hours before Dorothy Mills saw lights moving in his house. I looked up at Harlow. He was reading the same page, his face expressionless. "You seeing this?" I asked. "I'm seeing it," he said. "Keep reading." The investigation had pursued every logical explanation. Maybe Mrs. Mills had been mistaken about the date. Maybe she'd seen lights from a passing car reflecting through the windows. Maybe the medical examiner's timeline was off. But the file contained a follow-up interview with Mrs. Mills where she insisted on the accuracy of her account. She'd even provided her diary, where she'd written about the lights that same night. The investigators had checked Keene's house for signs of burglary. Nothing was missing. They'd tested for carbon monoxide, checked for gas leaks, analyzed the food in his refrigerator for toxins. All negative. They'd interviewed his coworkers, his ex-wife, his brother in Cleveland. No one had any reason to want him dead. The case had remained open for 6 months before being transferred to cold case status. The final note in the file was written by Special Agent R. Bishop, the same name on the 3rd folder. It read, "No clear evidence of foul play despite circumstances. Recommend closure pending new evidence. Note, witness statements contain temporal inconsistencies that cannot be reconciled with physical evidence. Request file remain accessible for cross-reference purposes." I set the Keene folder down and reached for the 3rd one, the follow-up notes from Agent Bishop. This folder was different. The documents inside weren't official reports or typed statements. They were handwritten notes, dozens of pages covered in cramped, urgent handwriting. Some of the pages had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases had started to tear. The first page was dated November 3rd, 1983. It began, "This memo is not an official record. I'm writing this because I need to document what I've found, even if no one believes me. There's a connection between the Marsh disappearance and the Keene death. I don't know what it means yet, but I can't ignore it anymore." Bishop went on to describe a detail he'd noticed while reviewing both files. In the week before Evelyn Marsh disappeared, she'd called the local police department 3 times to report a prowler. She told the dispatcher that someone had been standing in her backyard at night, just standing there, not moving. The police had checked it out each time and found nothing. Thomas Keene had made similar calls in the days before his death. He'd reported seeing someone standing outside his bedroom window at night, a figure that didn't move, didn't leave footprints in the dirt below the window, just stood there and watched. But here's what made Bishop's note so unsettling. Both Marsh and Keene had described the figure in almost identical terms. Tall, maybe 6.5 feet, wearing what looked like a long coat, face obscured in shadow even when the porch light was on. Bishop had tried to get approval to reopen both cases, to investigate this connection further. His requests had been denied. The official reason was lack of resources and absence of new evidence. But in his notes, Bishop hinted at something else. He wrote, "Talked to Deputy Director Nolan this morning. He said some cases aren't meant to be solved. When I pressed him on what that meant, he told me to drop it, not as a suggestion, as an order." The rest of Bishop's notes became increasingly fragmented. He'd started compiling a list of similar cases from other jurisdictions. Missing persons and unexplained deaths spanning from 1975 to 1982, all sharing the same strange details. Witnesses reporting figures standing motionless outside homes. Temporal inconsistencies in the evidence. Cases that went cold despite extensive investigations. He'd found 17 cases in total. Different states, different victims. No apparent connection except for these recurring details. In his notes, Bishop had drawn lines connecting them on a map, creating a rough geographic pattern that seemed to follow major highways through the Midwest and Northeast. The last entry in Bishop's folder was dated December 19th, 1983. It was brief. "They found out I've been looking into this. My supervisor wants to see me Monday morning. I'm going to make copies of everything tonight. Keep them somewhere safe. If something happens to me, someone needs to know about this." There was nothing after that. No final report, no explanation of what happened at the meeting with his supervisor, just those final words and then silence. I looked at Harlow. "Who's our Bishop? You ever hear that name?" Harlow was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Robert Bishop, he was an agent here in the 80s. Good investigator. Worked mostly cold cases and missing persons. What happened to him? Retired in 84. Moved to Montana or Wyoming, somewhere out west. Haven't heard anything about him since. That's it? He just retired?" Harlow started putting the folders back in the box. His movements were deliberate, mechanical. "That's what the file says. Early retirement, stress-related." I wanted to ask more, but something in Harlow's expression told me to let it drop. We finished boxing up Bishop's notes in silence and moved the box to a cart designated for archives. The rest of the afternoon passed without incident. We cataloged another dozen boxes, none of them as strange as 47B. By 5 o'clock, Harlow said he was heading home and suggested I do the same. I told him I wanted to finish up a few things first. After he left, I went back to the cart where we'd placed box 47B. I wanted to make copies of Bishop's notes, maybe do some research on my own time. But when I got to the cart, the box was gone. I checked the other carts, thinking maybe someone had moved it by mistake. Nothing. I went to the archives supervisor and asked if anyone had signed out box 47B. She looked at me like I was speaking a different language. "What box?" she asked. 47B. We found it this afternoon. 3 folders inside, cold cases from the 70s and 80s. She turned to her computer and pulled up the inventory system. After a few minutes of searching, she looked up at me with a frown. "There's no box 47B in the system. Are you sure about the label?" I was sure. I'd read it myself, handled the box, gone through every page inside. But according to the archive's database, it had never existed. I went back to the basement and found Harlow's contact information in the staff directory. I called his cell phone. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me back about the box we'd found. He never did. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Bishop's notes, about the patterns he'd found, about 17 unsolved cases connected by details that shouldn't connect. I thought about Evelyn Marsh seeing someone standing in her yard, Thomas Keene seeing someone outside his window. Different people, different places, different times. But the same figure, the same impossible stillness. Around 2 in the morning, I got out of bed and went to my laptop. I pulled up the Bureau's case database and started searching for the names Bishop had mentioned in his notes. Most of them didn't appear in the system. The few that did were marked as closed or inactive, with minimal details available. I tried searching for Agent Robert Bishop himself. The system showed he'd been employed by the Bureau from 1969 to 1984. His personnel file was restricted, marked with a classification level I didn't have access to. The only publicly available information was his date of retirement, January 15, 1984. Less than a month after his last note in the folder. I spent the next 3 hours going down rabbit holes. I searched for cases matching the pattern Bishop had described. I found a few possibilities, but nothing definitive. Most of the files from that era had been digitized poorly, if at all. A lot of information had simply been lost to time and budget cuts. By 5 in the morning, I was exhausted and no closer to understanding what I'd found. I shut my laptop and tried to convince myself that it didn't matter. The box was gone. Bishop was retired. Whatever connection he'd seen between those cases, it was ancient history now. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the box had disappeared for a reason. That someone didn't want those files examined. That maybe Deputy Director Nolan had been right when he told Bishop that some cases aren't meant to be solved. I went back to work the next day intending to ask around about box 47B. But when I got to the office, Harlow was gone. His desk had been cleared out. His nameplate was missing from the door. I asked his supervisor where he was and got a terse response. Agent Harlow is no longer with this office. I tried calling him again. His number was disconnected. For the next week, I kept my head down and did my work. I didn't ask questions. I didn't search for the box. I tried to forget about Evelyn Marsh and Thomas Keene and the 17 cases that Robert Bishop had connected with red lines on a map. But late at night, when I was alone in my apartment, I'd think about that last note Bishop had written, about making copies, keeping them somewhere safe, about what might happen to him if someone found out what he knew. And I'd wonder if somewhere, in a storage unit or a safe deposit box or buried in someone's backyard, those copies still existed. If the evidence Bishop had compiled was still out there, waiting for someone to find it. I'd wonder what would happen if someone did. 3 months passed before I saw the box again. I'd almost convinced myself that I'd misremembered the whole thing, that box 47B had been a filing error, a misprint, something mundane and explainable that my tired brain had transformed into something sinister. The Bureau had a way of making you doubt your own memory like that. Too many late nights, too many cases bleeding into each other, too much information and not enough context. But then I got reassigned to work a missing persons case in Delaware, and everything came rushing back. The victim's name was Lauren Grant. She was a 29-year-old paralegal who'd vanished from her apartment in Wilmington on a Tuesday night in April. Her roommate had reported her missing after coming home from a business trip to find Lauren's car in the driveway, her phone on the kitchen counter, and her bedroom door wide open. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. Just gone. I was brought in because the local police had hit a wall. They'd interviewed everyone in Lauren's life, checked her bank records, pulled footage from every camera within a mile of her apartment. Nothing. She'd simply ceased to exist after 9:30 p.m. on April 16th. The lead detective on the case was a guy named Frank Morrison, a 25-year veteran who looked like he'd aged 30 years in the last week. He handed me the case file in his office on a gray Monday morning, and the first thing I noticed was how thin it was. "That's it?" I asked. "That's it," Morrison said. "We've got nothing. No witnesses, no suspects, no motive. Girl just vanished into thin air." I opened the file and started reading. The initial report was straightforward. Lauren had been home alone on the night of April 16th. Her roommate, Emily Vance, had been in Baltimore for a work conference. Lauren had texted Emily at 9:17 p.m. to say goodnight. That was the last confirmed contact anyone had with her. But as I went deeper into the file, I started seeing things that made my hands go cold. Lauren had called the Wilmington Police Department 4 times in the 2 weeks before her disappearance. Each time, she'd reported seeing someone standing outside her apartment building at night. A tall figure in what she described as a long coat or jacket, just standing there on the sidewalk, not moving. The police had responded to her first 2 calls, sending a patrol car to check it out. Both times, they'd found nothing. By the 3rd call, the dispatcher had logged it as a possible mental health issue and suggested Lauren contact a counselor. By the 4th call, they'd stopped sending officers altogether. I read the call transcripts. Lauren's voice came through in the dispatcher's notes as frightened but coherent. She wasn't hysterical. She wasn't making wild accusations. She was simply reporting what she was seeing and asking for help. On her final call, made on April 14th at 11:43 p.m., Lauren had told the dispatcher, "It's the same person. I know it's the same person. They're just standing there looking up at my window. Please send someone." The dispatcher had logged the call but marked it as low priority. No officer had been sent. I looked up at Morrison. "Did anyone follow up on these calls?" He nodded. "After she went missing, yeah. We went back through all of them. Checked surveillance footage from nearby buildings, interviewed neighbors, the whole deal. Nobody else reported seeing anyone matching that description. A couple people said they'd seen Lauren acting paranoid in the days before she disappeared, looking over her shoulder, checking her locks multiple times. You think she was having a breakdown?" Morrison shrugged. "Honestly, I don't know what to think. Her family says she'd been under a lot of stress at work, but nothing that would explain this. No history of mental illness, no drug use. She was just a normal person living a normal life, until she wasn't." I kept reading. The next section detailed the search of Lauren's apartment. Her bedroom was exactly how you'd expect it to be at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. Bed made, closet organized, nothing out of place. But there was one detail that stood out. Her laptop had been open on her desk, still powered on when police arrived. The last thing she'd been looking at was a Google search. The search term was, "How to tell if someone is watching your house." The browser history showed she'd been researching home security systems, surveillance cameras, and personal safety devices for the past week. She'd bookmarked articles about stalking, about how to document evidence of harassment, about what to do if the police won't help you. I thought about Evelyn Marsh calling the police about a prowler, Thomas Keene reporting someone outside his window, now Lauren Grant, searching for answers online because the authorities wouldn't listen. "Did you find anything else on the laptop?" I asked. Morrison shook his head. "Just normal stuff, work emails, social media, some online shopping. Our tech guys went through it with a fine-tooth comb, nothing unusual. I made a note to have the Bureau's cyber team take another look, just to be sure." Then I moved on to the witness statements. Emily Vance, the roommate, had been interviewed extensively. She said Lauren had been acting strange for about 2 weeks before she disappeared. Jumping at sudden noises, insisting on keeping all the blinds closed after dark, coming up with excuses to avoid being home alone at night. Emily had asked her what was wrong, and Lauren had said she felt like she was being watched. Emily had assumed it was just stress from work, maybe anxiety about an upcoming court case she was helping prepare. She'd suggested Lauren see a therapist, take some time off, get out of town for a few days. Lauren had said she couldn't. When Emily asked why, Lauren had just said, "It wouldn't help. They'd still be there when I got back." The statement gave me chills. Not he'd still be there, not it would still be happening. They, plural, like Lauren thought there was more than one person watching her. I read through the rest of the interviews. Lauren's co-workers said she'd been distracted lately, missing meetings, making small mistakes on documents. Her boss had pulled her aside 2 days before she disappeared to ask if everything was okay at home. Lauren had said yes, but the boss didn't believe her. Her parents, who lived in New Jersey, said they'd talked to her on the phone 3 days before she vanished. She'd sounded tired but normal. They'd made plans for her to visit the following weekend. She never made it. The last section of the file contained the crime scene photos. I went through them slowly, looking for anything the local police might have missed. Lauren's apartment was neat, almost obsessively so. Every surface was clean. Every item had its place. The kind of order that comes from someone trying to maintain control in a situation where they feel powerless. But there was one photo that stopped me cold. It was a shot of Lauren's bedroom window taken from inside the room. The window faced the street with a clear view of the sidewalk below. Someone had placed strips of tape on the glass, creating a grid pattern. Small pieces of paper were attached to some of the strips, each one marked with a date and time. According to the evidence log, the papers were Lauren's handwriting. Each note documented a sighting of the figure she'd been reporting. The dates ranged from April 2nd to April 15th, 14 separate incidents over 2 weeks. The notes were brief but specific. April 2nd, 11:47 p.m., south side of street, standing near light post. April 5th, 1:23 a.m., same location, did not move for 18 minutes. April 8th, 10:52 p.m., moved to north side, stood directly across from the building. I counted the notes. There were 17 in total, some days with multiple sightings, 17, the same number of cases Robert Bishop had connected in his notes. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Detective Morrison," I said, keeping my voice level, "did anyone try to verify these sightings? Check if there were cameras that might have caught this person?" "We tried," he said, "but the closest camera is 2 blocks away and it doesn't cover that section of sidewalk. We've got nothing." I took photos of the notes with my phone, making sure to capture every detail. Then I asked if I could borrow the case file to review overnight. Morrison agreed, probably relieved to have federal help on a case that was going nowhere fast. That night, I spread everything out on my dining room table. The Lauren Grant file on one side, my notes about Box 47B on the other. I'd written down everything I could remember from Bishop's folders before they disappeared. The names, the dates, the patterns he'd identified. I started making connections. Evelyn Marsh disappeared. March 13, 1979, had reported a prowler multiple times in the week before. Thomas Keene, found dead June 7, 1981, had reported someone standing outside his window. Lauren Grant disappeared. April 16, 2024, had documented 17 sightings of someone watching her apartment. Different decades, different states, but the same pattern. I pulled up the Bureau's database and started searching for similar cases. I limited my search to missing persons and unexplained deaths where the victim had reported being watched or followed before the incident. I expected to find a handful of cases at most. The search returned 43 results. I stared at the number, my heart pounding. 43 cases spanning from 1975 to present day, all of them sharing the same basic elements. Victim reports being watched, police dismiss the claims, victim disappears or dies under mysterious circumstances. I started opening the files one by one. Most of them were thin, marked as cold cases or closed with no resolution. But they all had the same thread running through them, the same detail that should have connected them but somehow never did. In every single case, witnesses or the victims themselves had described seeing someone tall, wearing a long coat, standing motionless for extended periods of time. Sometimes outside homes, sometimes in parking lots or on street corners. Always watching, always still. I pulled up a map and started plotting the locations. The cases formed a rough pattern across the eastern United States, concentrated in urban areas but spreading out into smaller towns and rural communities. No clear geographic center, no obvious connection between the locations. But there was something else. I noticed that the cases seemed to come in clusters, groups of 3 or 4 incidents happening within a few months of each other in the same general area. Then nothing for a year or two, then another cluster somewhere else. It was like something was moving, circling back to previous locations, expanding its territory. I spent hours going through the files, taking notes, making connections. By 3 in the morning, I had a timeline laid out across my dining room table. 43 cases. 79 victims if you counted family members and witnesses who'd later gone missing or died under suspicious circumstances. And not a single conviction. Not a single arrest. Not even a viable suspect in any of the cases. It was impossible. Cases like these always leave trails. Evidence, witnesses, mistakes. But these files read like ghost stories, all atmosphere and no substance. Just people vanishing or dying, and a tall figure in a long coat that nobody could identify or catch on camera. I thought about calling my supervisor, laying all of this out, asking for resources to investigate properly. But something held me back. I remembered what happened to Robert Bishop when he started connecting these cases. I remembered Agent Harlow disappearing after we found Box 47B. Some cases aren't meant to be solved. That's what Deputy Director Nolan had told Bishop back in 1983. I looked at the Lauren Grant file, at the photo of her window with 17 dated notes taped to the glass. 17 sightings, 17 cases connected by Bishop. 43 cases now if you included everything since. The number kept growing. I decided to do something that probably wasn't smart, but I couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. I accessed the personnel files for the lead investigators on each of these cases. I wanted to know what happened to them after their cases went cold. What I found made my blood run cold. Of the 43 cases I'd identified, 31 had been investigated by federal agents at some point. Of those 31 agents, only 7 were still employed by the Bureau. 6 had retired early, all within 6 months of their case being transferred to inactive status. The others had transferred to different divisions, different cities, different careers entirely, and 3 of them were dead. I pulled up the death records. Agent Michael Nolan, who told Bishop to drop his investigation, had died in a car accident in 1989. Agent Susan Reeves, who'd worked the Evelyn Marsh case, had died of a heart attack in '95 at age 47. Agent David Porter, who'd investigated a cluster of disappearances in Ohio in 2003, had died by suicide in 2007. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was the stress of the job. But the pattern was there, and I couldn't unsee it. I started checking on Bishop himself. According to public records, he'd moved to Wyoming in 1984 and bought a small property outside Laramie. He'd lived there for 30 years, paying his taxes, staying off the grid, avoiding any attention. Then, in 2014, his property had been sold. I couldn't find any record of him after that. No death certificate, no forwarding address, no trace. It was like he'd done what the victims in his files had done. Like he'd simply ceased to exist. I looked at the clock. It was almost 4 in the morning. I needed to sleep, but I knew I wouldn't be able to. My mind was racing, connecting dots that probably shouldn't be connected, seeing patterns where maybe there were none. But I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I'd found was pointing to something real. Something that had been happening for decades. Something that the Bureau either couldn't stop or wouldn't acknowledge. I thought about Lauren Grant, alone in her apartment, documenting every sighting because the police wouldn't help her. I thought about the 17 notes taped to her window, her desperate attempt to create evidence, to prove that what she was experiencing was real. And I thought about the fact that on April 16th, after 17 sightings over 2 weeks, she'd vanished anyway, despite her documentation, despite her precautions, despite everything she'd done to protect herself. I pulled out my phone and called Detective Morrison. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me back, said I'd found some connections that might be relevant to the Grant case. Then I did something I'd been avoiding. I pulled up the Bureau's internal directory and searched for Deputy Director Nolan's current assignment. The search came back negative. There was no record of anyone by that name ever being employed by the FBI. But I'd read his name in Bishop's notes. I'd seen it written in that cramped, urgent handwriting. Bishop had quoted him directly. I searched for Agent Harlow next, the man who'd been my partner when we found Box 47B. The one who'd disappeared from the office without explanation. The system showed he'd been employed by the Bureau for 22 years. His last day was marked as the day after we'd found the box. The reason for termination was listed as voluntary resignation. But I remembered the look on his face when we'd opened that box, the way he'd gone quiet when I asked about Bishop, the deliberate, mechanical way he'd packed everything back up and moved it to the cart. That wasn't someone who was planning to quit his job the next day. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the silence of my apartment. Outside my window, the street was empty. The sodium lights cast orange pools on the pavement. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't help thinking about all those victims, looking out their windows at the same empty streets, seeing something there that nobody else could see, calling for help that never came, and then disappearing anyway. I got up and checked my door locks, then my windows, then the blinds, making sure they were completely closed. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the cases had gotten into my head, that I needed to step back and think rationally. But as I climbed into bed and turned off the lights, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. That by connecting these cases, by seeing the pattern that Bishop had seen, I'd crossed some kind of invisible line. The last thought I had before sleep finally took me was about Bishop's final note. About making copies of everything, keeping them somewhere safe. I wondered if he'd ever retrieved those copies. I wondered if anyone had. The first call came 3 days after I'd compiled my research on the 43 cases. It was just after midnight and I was still awake, going through the Lauren Grant file for the dozenth time. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Silence. Not dead air, but the particular quality of silence that comes when someone is on the other end, listening. Hello? I said again. Who is this? The line clicked off. I told myself it was a wrong number, a robocall, something mundane. But my hand was shaking when I set the phone down. The second call came an hour later. Same, unknown number. This time I didn't say anything when I answered. I just waited, listening to that same pregnant silence on the other end. After about 30 seconds, a voice spoke. Male, middle-aged, with a slight southern accent I couldn't quite place. You should stop looking. Then the line went dead. I sat there, phone in my hand, heart hammering. The voice had been calm, almost gentle, like someone giving friendly advice, but the words were a threat, no matter how softly they'd been delivered. I pulled up the call log and tried to trace the number. It came back as unlisted, routed through a VoIP service that could be anywhere. No way to identify the caller. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my dining room table with all my notes spread out, trying to decide what to do. I could report the calls to my supervisor, but what would I say? That I'd been investigating cases I hadn't been assigned to, making connections that 30 years of agents hadn't made, and now someone was calling me to warn me off. They'd either think I was paranoid, or they'd know exactly what I was talking about. And if it was the latter, I wasn't sure which option scared me more. The third call came the next morning at 6:47 a.m. I was in the shower when I heard my phone ringing. I got out, dripping water across the floor, and grabbed it just before it went to voicemail. Stop calling me, I said. You need to listen very carefully. Same voice as before. What you're looking into, it's not what you think it is. And even if you figure it out, it won't matter. These cases are closed for a reason. What reason? Because some things can't be investigated. Some patterns can't be proven, and some people who try end up like Robert Bishop. My blood went cold. What happened to Bishop? He got smart, eventually. Took him a few years, but he figured out that some doors are better left closed. You should do the same. Who are you? Someone trying to help you. The last person you're going to hear from before this gets serious. Walk away from the Lauren Grant case. Delete your files. Forget about Box 47B. Go back to doing your job like none of this ever happened. And if I don't? There was a long pause. When the voice came back, it had lost its gentle quality. Then you'll find out why the other 43 cases never got solved. And you won't like the answer. The line went dead. I stood there, naked and dripping, staring at my phone. The caller had known about Box 47B, had known I'd been researching the 43 cases, had known about Bishop, which meant someone inside the bureau was watching what I was doing. Had been watching since the day Harlow and I found that box in the evidence room. I got dressed and drove straight to the office. I needed to talk to someone I could trust, someone who'd been around long enough to know what was really going on. The problem was I wasn't sure who that was anymore. I ended up in the office of Assistant Director Grace Keller, a 28-year veteran who ran the Criminal Investigative Division. She was the highest-ranking person I could access without making an appointment, and she had a reputation for being straight with her agents. I knocked on her door at 8:15 a.m. She looked up from her computer, surprised to see me there so early. "Agent Miller," she said, "what can I do for you?" I closed the door behind me and sat down without being invited. I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to hear me out before you decide I'm crazy." She leaned back in her chair, studying me. "Okay, I'm listening." I told her everything. About Box 47B, about the Marsh and Keene cases, about Bishop's notes and the pattern he'd identified. I told her about Lauren Grant and the 43 cases I'd found, about the connections that nobody had made or nobody wanted to acknowledge. And I told her about the phone calls. Keller listened without interrupting. Her expression didn't change. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Do you have any of this documented?" she finally asked. "I have notes, photos of the Lauren Grant file, the search results from the database. But Box 47B is gone, and I can't access Bishop's personnel file." "What about Agent Harlow? Can he corroborate finding this box?" "Harlow's gone. Quit the day after we found it." Keller nodded slowly. "And you think that's connected?" "I think someone made him quit. Same way someone made Bishop retire in 1984. Same way 31 federal agents either left the Bureau or died after investigating these cases. That's a serious accusation." "I know, but the pattern is there. You can check it yourself." She turned to her computer and pulled up the personnel database. She spent about 10 minutes running searches, checking names, cross-referencing cases. Her face remained carefully neutral, but I saw her jaw tighten. "Interesting," she said finally. "You see it?" "I see statistical anomalies. That doesn't prove conspiracy." "What about the phone calls? Someone inside the Bureau is monitoring my research. Or someone outside who has access to our systems. Wouldn't be the first time we had a leak." I wanted to argue, but she held up a hand. "I'm not dismissing what you're telling me," she said. "But you need to understand how this looks. You're a relatively new agent, and you're claiming to have uncovered a decades-long pattern that thousands of experienced investigators missed. You're suggesting that the Bureau is either complicit or incompetent on a massive scale, and your evidence consists of a box that's disappeared and a personnel file you can't access. I can prove the connections between the cases. Maybe, but connections aren't evidence of anything except coincidence. People report being followed all the time. Some of them are paranoid, some of them are being stalked. And yes, some of them disappear or die. It's tragic, but it doesn't mean there's a serial killer who's been operating for 50 years without leaving any trace evidence." "What about the phone calls?" "You should report those to our security division. If someone's threatening you, that's serious. But it doesn't prove anything about these cases." I felt my frustration building. "So what are you saying, that I should just drop this?" Keller sighed. "I'm saying you need to be smart about this. You want to investigate the Lauren Grant case? Fine, that's your assignment. You want to look for patterns in similar cases? Also fine, as long as it's relevant to your investigation. But you can't go on a crusade based on a theory and a mysterious box." Bishop tried to tell people. They shut him down. "You don't know that. You have his notes, written by a man who, according to his personnel file, was experiencing severe stress and paranoia. Those notes aren't reliable evidence. They knew something. Bishop, Nolan, all of them. They knew these cases were connected." Keller's expression hardened. "Listen to me carefully. If what you're suggesting is true, if there really is some kind of cover-up or conspiracy, then you need to be very careful how you proceed. Coming in here and making accusations, leaving a paper trail, that's not going to help you. It's going to make you a target." "I'm already a target. That's what the phone calls mean." "Then maybe you should consider taking the caller's advice." I stared at her. "You're telling me to drop this?" "I'm telling you to think about what you're doing. You've been with the Bureau for what, 18 months? You're smart, you're thorough, and you have good instincts, but you're also young, and you don't understand how things work at this level." Some cases don't get solved. Some patterns don't have explanations. And sometimes the smartest thing you can do is accept that and move on. That's what they told Bishop. And Bishop lived to retirement. He's probably somewhere right now, living a quiet life, staying out of trouble. Is that really such a bad outcome? I wanted to tell her that Bishop had disappeared in 2014, that there was no record of him after that. But something held me back. If Keller was trying to warn me off, telling her I knew that would only make things worse. What about Lauren Grant? I asked instead. She's still missing. Her family deserves answers. Then work her case. Follow the evidence where it leads. But stop trying to connect it to 43 other cases and a conspiracy theory about federal agents being silenced. She stood up, indicating the meeting was over. I stood too, but I didn't leave. What happened to Deputy Director Nolan? I asked. Keller's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. What? The man who told Bishop to drop his investigation in 1983. What happened to him? I have no idea who you're talking about. His name is in Bishop's notes, Deputy Director Nolan. He ordered Bishop to stop investigating the connection between cases. There's no record of anyone named Nolan ever being a deputy director of this bureau. Then how did Bishop write about him? I don't know. Maybe he was mistaken. Maybe it was a different organization. Maybe he made it up. The point is, you're basing your entire theory on documents that may or may not be accurate, from a man who may or may not have been mentally stable. She walked to her door and opened it. Go work your case, Agent Miller. Do your job. And if you get any more threatening calls, report them immediately. But stop chasing ghosts. I left her office feeling worse than when I'd arrived. Keller hadn't dismissed me outright, but she hadn't helped me either. She told me to be careful, to not leave a paper trail, to think about what I was doing. She'd told me everything except to stop. I spent the rest of the day in the field interviewing Lauren Grant's neighbors and coworkers, looking for any detail the local police might have missed. I found nothing new. Everyone said the same things. Lauren was normal, stable, had no enemies, no drama in her life, until 2 weeks before she disappeared, when she'd suddenly become paranoid and withdrawn. That evening, I got a call from Detective Morrison. He sounded tired. "Hey, I got your message about finding connections to other cases," he said. "You got anything concrete?" "Maybe. Can we meet?" "Sure. How about tomorrow morning? There's a diner near the station." We agreed on a time and place. After we hung up, I started preparing what I was going to tell him. I couldn't show him everything I'd found. That would just make me look crazy. But I could show him the pattern, the similar cases, the descriptions that matched. My phone rang again at 11:34 p.m. Unknown number. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "What?" "You talked to Keller today." Same voice, still calm. "That was stupid." "How do you know that?" "We know everything you do, every call you make, every search you run, every person you talk to. You're not investigating anymore. You're just collecting evidence of how thoroughly we're watching you." Who is we? People who have been dealing with this a lot longer than you've been alive. People who understand that some things can't be stopped, only managed. What does that mean? It means that Lauren Grant was going to disappear no matter what you do. It means that the 43 cases you found are just a fraction of the real number. And it means that if you keep pushing, you're going to end up as case number 44. My hands were shaking. "Are you threatening to kill me?" "We don't kill anyone. We don't have to. We just stop protecting people. We stop running interference. We step back and let nature take its course. And nature has been very consistent when it comes to people who see too much." "See too much of what?" "You're asking the wrong questions. The question isn't what these people saw. The question is why they were allowed to see it. And the answer is because they were selected. Just like Lauren Grant was selected. Just like you might be selected if you don't walk away. Selected by who? By something we don't understand and can't stop. Something that's been happening for a very long time. Longer than the Bureau has existed. We don't investigate it anymore. We just document it, track it, try to minimize the damage. And most importantly, we keep people like you from making it worse by drawing attention to it. That's insane. No, it's practical. We've tried investigation. We've tried intervention. We've tried everything. Nothing works. The only thing we can do is monitor, document, and contain the information, which is where you're becoming a problem. I'm not going to stop. There was a long pause. When the voice came back, it sounded almost sad. Then I'm sorry. I really am. You seem like a decent person. But you're going to learn the same lesson Bishop learned. The same lesson we all learned, and I hope you survive it. But I can't guarantee that you will. Wait. The line went dead. I sat there, phone in my hand, trying to process what I'd just heard. It sounded like something out of a paranoid thriller. A secret group within the FBI monitoring something they couldn't control, silencing anyone who got too close. But it also explained everything. The missing box, Harlow's disappearance, the pattern of agents retiring or dying after working these cases, the fact that Bishop's file was classified. If it was true, then I was in more danger than I'd realized. Not from the Bureau itself, but from whatever they were trying to contain, whatever had been selecting victims for the past 50 years. I thought about Lauren Grant's 17 documented sightings, about the tall figure in the long coat, standing motionless, watching, about the fact that after 17 sightings, she'd vanished anyway. I looked out my window at the empty street below, the sodium lights, the shadows between them. And for the first time, I wondered if I was being watched too. I stopped going to the office after that. It wasn't a conscious decision at first. I told myself I was working the Lauren Grant case from home, following up on leads remotely, doing research that didn't require access to Bureau resources. But the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of what I might find. Afraid of who might be watching. Afraid that by continuing to investigate, I was doing exactly what the voice on the phone had warned me against. I started seeing things. Not the figure. Not yet. But I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, turn to look, and there'd be nothing there. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment when I knew the building was empty. I'd wake up at night with the certainty that someone was standing in my bedroom, even though the door was locked and the windows were sealed. I told myself it was stress, paranoia, the natural result of spending too much time thinking about people who'd been watched, followed, and eventually disappeared. But I also started documenting everything. I created a cloud backup of all my files, stored under a fake name with a disposable email address. I wrote down everything I knew about the cases, about Bishop's investigation, about the phone calls. I made copies and hid them in different locations, the way Bishop had planned to do before he disappeared. And I kept investigating, because I didn't know what else to do. Detective Morrison never showed up for our meeting at the diner. I waited for 2 hours before calling him. His phone went straight to voicemail. I tried the Wilmington Police Department and was told he'd taken an unexpected leave of absence. No, they didn't know when he'd be back. No, they couldn't give me his personal contact information. I drove to the station anyway and talked to his partner, a young detective named Sarah Chen. She looked uncomfortable when I asked about Morrison. "He just left," she said. "Came in yesterday morning, cleaned out his desk and said he was taking personal time, didn't say why." "Did he seem upset? Afraid?" "He seemed determined. like he'd made up his mind about something and wasn't going to discuss it. "Did he mention the Lauren Grant case?" Chen shook her head. "Not to me, but he took his personal copy of the file with him when he left." I felt the familiar chill. Morrison had been working this case for weeks. He'd seen the same patterns I'd seen, the same details that didn't add up. And now he was gone. Just like Harlow. Just like Bishop, eventually. I thanked Chen and left. I was halfway back to my car when I noticed it. A tall figure in a long coat standing on the corner across the street. My heart stopped. I froze on the sidewalk, unable to move, unable to look away. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there facing in my direction. I couldn't see their face. The coat had a hood, or the angle was wrong, or the light was bad, but I could feel them watching me. Could feel the weight of their attention like a physical thing. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably less than a minute. Then a bus passed between us, and when it cleared, the figure was gone. I ran to my car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove home 20 miles over the speed limit, checking my rearview mirror constantly, certain I'd see the figure standing in the road behind me. I didn't see them again. Not that day. But I knew. I knew with absolute certainty that I'd crossed some invisible threshold, that by continuing to investigate, by refusing to walk away, I'd done something that couldn't be undone. I'd been selected. That night, I sat at my computer and wrote down everything that had happened. Every detail, every conversation, every strange occurrence. I uploaded it to my backup account and sent copies to 3 different email addresses I'd created for this purpose. Then, I wrote a letter. Not to my supervisor or to Assistant Director Keller, to Lauren Grant's parents. I told them I was sorry. Sorry that I couldn't find their daughter. Sorry that the case was more complicated than anyone had explained. Sorry that the truth, whatever it was, wouldn't bring them peace. I told them that their daughter had seen something real, that she hadn't been paranoid or mentally ill, that 17 documented sightings over 2 weeks meant she'd been trying to warn people, trying to create evidence, trying to prove what was happening to her. And I told them that I believed her. I sealed the letter and put it in my desk drawer. I didn't mail it. I wasn't ready to give up yet. Instead, I started looking for Robert Bishop. I'd searched for him before, but only through official channels. Now, I tried everything else: social media, property records, voter registration, utility bills. I called every R. Bishop in Wyoming and Montana and Idaho, asking if they'd worked for the FBI in the 80s. Most people hung up on me. A few were polite but unhelpful. One old man in Laramie listened to my whole story before saying, "Young lady, if you're smart, you'll forget whatever it is you think you know and go live your life." "Do you know Robert Bishop?" I asked. I knew a lot of people over the years, can't remember them all. This would have been someone who moved to the area in 1984, kept to himself, might have been paranoid or careful about security. The man was quiet for a long time. If I did know someone like that, what would you want with them? I'm investigating the same cases he investigated. I need to know what he found, what made him stop. Maybe he stopped because he was smart. Maybe he stopped because he wanted to live. Is he still alive? Another long pause. I don't know. And if I did know, I wouldn't tell you, because some things are better left alone. He hung up. I tried calling back, but he didn't answer. I spent the next week in a haze of research and paranoia. I'd work for hours, then suddenly become convinced someone was watching my apartment. I'd check the windows, the locks, the peephole. I'd stand in the dark, looking out at the street, searching for a tall figure in a long coat. I never saw it, but I felt it. The presence of something watching, waiting, patient. The phone calls stopped, which somehow made things worse. At least when they were calling, I knew what they wanted. The silence meant something had changed, that they'd stopped trying to warn me off because the warning period was over. On the 9th day, I got a text message from an unknown number. It contained a single address in Delaware, about 40 miles from Lauren Grant's apartment. No explanation, no context, just the address. I should have ignored it, should have deleted it and pretended I never saw it. But I knew what it was. Someone was giving me information, someone who wanted me to find something. I drove to the address the next morning. It was a storage facility on the outskirts of a small town I'd never heard of. The kind of place with numbered units and combination locks and no one asking questions. I found the unit number that matched the last 4 digits of the address. The lock was already open. Inside was a single filing cabinet. I opened the top drawer. Inside were files, dozens of them, all marked with case numbers I didn't recognize and names I'd never heard. But when I started reading, I recognized the patterns. These were the cases Bishop had documented, not just the 17 from his notes, but more. 53 cases in total, spanning from 1973 to 2012, each one meticulously researched, cross-referenced, analyzed, and each one ending the same way. Victim reports being watched. Police dismiss the reports. Victim disappears or dies. No suspects, no evidence, no resolution. Bishop had spent 30 years compiling this information. Long after his official retirement, long after he was supposed to have stopped investigating, he'd continued, tracking new cases, making connections, building a database that no one else knew existed. At the bottom of the last drawer was a sealed envelope with my name on it. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter, handwritten in the same cramped script I'd seen in Box 47B. If you're reading this, you've made the same connections I made. You've seen the pattern, and you're probably wondering if you're in danger. The answer is yes, but not in the way you think. I've spent 40 years trying to understand what's happening. I've interviewed witnesses, analyzed evidence, consulted experts in every field I could think of. And I've come to a conclusion that I know sounds insane, but is the only explanation that fits all the facts. These people aren't being killed by a person. They're being selected by something else, something that's been operating for much longer than we've been documenting it, something that watches, chooses, and eventually takes. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it selects certain people and not others. I don't know where the victims go or what happens to them. All I know is that once you see the pattern, once you really understand what's happening, you become visible to it. That's what happened to me. That's what happened to every agent who got close enough to see the truth. We became visible. And once you're visible, it's only a matter of time. Some of us ran. Some of us hid. Some of us tried to fight. None of it mattered. The ones who survived were the ones who stopped investigating, who walked away, who decided that some truths aren't worth knowing. I didn't walk away. Not completely. I kept documenting, kept researching, kept trying to understand. And I've been living with the consequences for 40 years. If you're smart, you'll destroy these files and forget everything you've learned. You'll go back to your normal cases and your normal life, and you'll never think about this again. But if you're like me, you won't be able to do that. You'll keep investigating because you need to know, because you think maybe you'll be the one who figures it out, who stops it, who saves the next Lauren Grant. So I'll tell you what I've learned. It appears in cycles, clusters of cases every few years, concentrated in specific areas, then nothing for a while. The cycles are getting shorter. The gaps are getting smaller. It's accelerating. It selects people who notice it, who document it, who try to prove it exists. The more evidence they gather, the more certain it becomes that they'll be next. And it never leaves evidence, never makes mistakes, never gives us anything we can use to identify it or stop it or even understand it. All we can do is document, track, and warn the ones who come after us. You've been warned. What you do next is up to you. But if you keep going, don't say, "I didn't tell you." Robert Bishop, October 2014. I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it back in the envelope and looked around the storage unit. 53 cases, 40 years of research. And Bishop's final message was that there was nothing we could do except document and hope we survived. I thought about Lauren Grant, about her 17 notes taped to the window, about how she'd tried so hard to prove what was happening to her, and it hadn't mattered. I thought about Morrison, who'd taken his case file and disappeared. I thought about Harlow, who'd seen Box 47B and quit the next day. I thought about all the agents who'd gotten close to the truth and either run or died or vanished. And I thought about the figure I'd seen outside the police station, the tall shape in the long coat, standing motionless, watching. I left the storage unit and drove home. I didn't take the files. I didn't photograph them. I just left them there, where Bishop had left them for me to find. That night, I started writing this document. Everything I'd learned. Everything I'd found. Everything Bishop had told me in his letter. I'm writing it because it's what I do. Document, track, warn. I'm writing it because maybe the next person who makes these connections will be smarter than me. Will walk away before it's too late. I'm writing it because Lauren Grant deserved better than this. Better than being selected by something we can't identify, can't stop, can't even prove exists. But mostly I'm writing it because I can feel it now. The presence, the weight of being watched. I haven't seen the figure again, but I know it's there. Patient, waiting. I've been selected. I don't know when it will happen. Tomorrow? Next week? Next year? Bishop lasted 40 years after he first saw the pattern. Maybe I'll be lucky. Maybe I'll have that long. Or maybe I won't. All I know is that this document will be my version of Bishop's files. My warning to whoever comes next. My proof that Lauren Grant wasn't crazy. That the 43 cases I found weren't coincidence. That the pattern is real even if we can't explain it. This file will be stored with the others, in the cloud, in hidden locations, waiting for the next agent who starts making connections, who sees the pattern, who refuses to walk away, and when they find it, they'll have the same choice I had. Walk away and live, or keep going and become part of the pattern themselves. I've made my choice. I'm still investigating, still looking for answers, still hoping that maybe I'll be different, that maybe I'll be the one who figures it out, but I'm also realistic. I know how this ends. The Bureau won't find me. They'll mark my file as resigned, or transferred, or maybe deceased, if they find enough evidence to justify it. My apartment will be emptied. My cases will be reassigned, and eventually someone else will find Box 47B or something like it, and the cycle will start again. That's the real pattern, not the victims, not the figure in the long coat. The pattern is investigators who see the truth and can't unsee it, who cross the threshold from ignorance to knowledge and pay the price. Robert Bishop paid it. Morrison paid it. Harlow paid it. And I'm paying it now. This is my last official record. Tomorrow, I'm going back to Lauren Grant's apartment. I'm going to stand outside and wait. If the figure appears, I'm going to document it, photograph it, record it, get evidence that no one can dismiss or explain away. I know it's stupid. I know it's probably exactly what Bishop would tell me not to do. But I can't just accept that this is how it works, that these people get selected and taken and we just document it and move on to the next case. Someone has to try to stop it, even if that someone ends up as case number 54. I'm leaving copies of this document in the storage unit with Bishop's files. I'm emailing it to my backup accounts. I'm putting a physical copy in my desk drawer next to the letter I wrote to Lauren Grant's parents. If you're reading this, if you found these files and started making the same connections, I have one piece of advice. Walk away. Don't be like Bishop. Don't be like me, just walk away. But if you can't, if you're already too far in to turn back, then at least be careful. Document everything. Don't trust the Bureau. Don't expect help. And most importantly, don't assume you're different. Don't assume you'll be the one who solves this. Because the pattern doesn't make exceptions. It just keeps going. I first heard about the Whitmore tape on a Tuesday morning in March, during what should have been a routine case review. My supervisor, Agent Reeves, dropped a thin manila folder on my desk and told me to look into it when I had time. The folder was marked with a case number from 997, which immediately told me this wasn't going to be simple. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Cold case. Woman named Patricia Whitmore went missing in upstate New York. Local PD handled it initially, passed it to us after 6 months with no leads. File's been sitting in storage ever since. Why pull it now?" Reeves hesitated, which wasn't like him. He'd been with the Bureau for 32 years and had the kind of steady demeanor that came from seeing everything twice. Her daughter filed a Freedom of Information request. Wants to know what we did to find her mother. Turns out we didn't do much. Need you to review the file, write up a summary we can send back. I opened the folder. Inside were maybe 20 pages of reports, some photographs, and a property receipt listing evidence that had been collected. Standard missing person case from the look of it, except for one detail that caught my eye. "There's an interview tape referenced here," I said, "but I don't see it in the evidence list." That's the problem. Tape was logged as evidence in 97. We're supposed to have it in storage, but nobody can find it. Need you to track it down, listen to it if you find it, and include a summary in your report. And if I don't find it, then we tell the daughter we lost it and hope she doesn't sue us. Reeves turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. The detective who worked this case originally, guy named Frank Holloway, he retired about 10 years ago. Might want to give him a call, see if he remembers anything about the tape." I spent the rest of that morning reading through the Whitmore file. Patricia Whitmore had been 43 years old when she disappeared on November 8, 1997. She'd been a registered nurse at a hospital in Syracuse, divorced, living alone in a small house on the east side of town. According to the initial report, her coworkers had reported her missing after she failed to show up for 3 consecutive shifts. Police had found her car in her driveway, her house locked. No signs of forced entry or struggle. Her purse was on the kitchen table. Her keys were on a hook by the door. The only unusual detail was that her bedroom closet was open and several articles of clothing appeared to be missing, suggesting she might have packed a bag and left voluntarily. But Patricia's bank accounts showed no activity after November 7th. Her credit cards hadn't been used. No one had heard from her. Her daughter, who'd been away at college at the time, said her mother had given no indication she was planning to go anywhere. The investigation had followed standard procedures. Police interviewed friends, family, co-workers, ex-husband. They checked bus stations, airports, hospitals. They searched local parks and waterways. Nothing. Patricia Whitmore had simply vanished. What interested me was a note buried in the middle of the file. 3 days before her disappearance, Patricia had gone to the Syracuse Police Department and asked to speak with a detective. She told them she had information about an old case, something she'd witnessed years ago but had been too afraid to report at the time. The detective who'd taken her statement was Frank Holloway. He'd scheduled a formal interview for November 10th, 1997, 2 days after Patricia disappeared. The interview never happened, obviously, but according to the notes, Holloway had conducted a preliminary interview on November 5th, and that interview had been recorded. That was the tape I needed to find. I started with the Bureau's evidence storage facility, a sprawling warehouse complex in Virginia that housed physical evidence from thousands of cases. I filed a request for the Whitmore evidence box, citing the case number and the tape's property number. 3 days later, I got a call from a storage technician named Marcus Webb. He sounded apologetic. "I've got your box here," he said, "but the tape you're looking for isn't in it." "You're sure?" "Positive. I pulled everything out, checked it against the property list. You've got some photographs, some personal items we collected from the house, a few documents. No tape. Could it have been misfiled?" "It's possible. But the property receipt shows it was logged in with the rest of the evidence. Should be here. Is there any record of it being checked out? Maybe someone borrowed it for review?" Webb checked his system. Nothing in the digital records. But keep in mind, this case is from '97. We didn't digitize the checkout logs until 2003. If someone took it before then, there might not be a record. I thanked him and hung up. A missing tape from a missing person case. It could be simple, bureaucratic incompetence, evidence lost in the shuffle of decades. But something about it bothered me. I pulled up Frank Holloway's contact information. He'd retired from the Syracuse PD in 2014 and moved to a small town in Vermont. His phone number was still active. I called it that afternoon. He answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was rough, like he'd smoked for years and recently quit. "Holloway." "Detective Holloway. My name is Agent Nolan with the FBI. I'm reviewing an old case you worked in '97, Patricia Whitmore. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" There was a long pause. Patricia Whitmore. Jesus, haven't thought about that name in years. "I'm trying to locate an interview tape. The file says you recorded a preliminary interview with her on November 5th, 1997. Do you remember that?" Another pause, longer this time. "Yeah, I remember." "The tape's missing from evidence storage. Any chance you kept a copy?" "No, I turned in the original. That was standard procedure." "Didn't make copies. Can you tell me what was on it? What she told you?" Holloway was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "You really want to know about that tape?" "That's why I'm calling. Let me ask you something first. Why is the Bureau looking into this now? Case has been cold for almost 30 years. Her daughter filed a FOIA request. We're putting together a summary." "Right, the daughter. She was what, 19 when her mother disappeared? Must be almost 50 now." He exhaled heavily. "Listen, Agent Nolan, I'm going to tell you the same thing I told my lieutenant back in '97. That tape shouldn't have gone missing, and the fact that it did tells me someone wanted it to stay missing." "What was on it?" "Patricia Whitmore came to me because she'd witnessed something in 1983. A murder. She'd been working as a nurse at the hospital when they brought in a young woman, early 20s, beaten severely. The woman died a few hours after arrival. Patricia was on duty that night, and she saw something that didn't sit right with her." "What did she see?" "The 2 men who brought the victim in claimed they'd found her on the side of the road, thought she'd been hit by a car, but Patricia noticed things that didn't match that story. The woman's injuries were inconsistent with a traffic accident. The men were too nervous, too eager to leave, and when one of them gave his name to the admitting nurse, Patricia recognized it." "Who was he?" "A cop, patrolman named Daniel Cross. He was off duty that night, showed up in civilian clothes, but Patricia had seen him around. She knew he was Syracuse PD. I grabbed a pen. Did she report this at the time? No, that's what she felt guilty about. She'd been going through a messy divorce, had a young daughter to worry about, didn't want to get involved in accusing a police officer of anything. So she kept quiet, but it ate at her for years. By 1997, Cross had left the department, moved out of state. Patricia figured it was safe enough to come forward. What happened to the victim? Was there ever a murder investigation? That's the thing. I pulled the records. The death was ruled accidental, hit and run, driver never found. The attending physician had noted the injuries were consistent with vehicular impact. Case was closed within a week. But Patricia didn't think it was an accident. She was certain it wasn't. And after I interviewed her, I started to think she was right. I requested to reopen the case, have the body exhumed for a second autopsy. My request was denied. By who? My lieutenant said there wasn't enough evidence to justify it, that Patricia's statement was unreliable after 14 years, that we couldn't go digging up bodies based on one nurse's suspicions. What did you do? I kept the tape, filed it as evidence in the Whitmore missing person case, figured that way it would at least be preserved, thought maybe someday someone would look into it properly. And 2 days after you interviewed her, Patricia disappeared. 2 days. I've thought about that timing every day since. You want my professional opinion? Someone knew she'd talk to me. Someone who didn't want that 1983 case reopened, and that someone made sure Patricia couldn't testify about what she saw. I wrote that down. Did you investigate that angle? Tried to, but my lieutenant shut me down. Said I was conspiracy theorizing that Patricia had probably just run off to start a new life somewhere. The case got transferred to you guys after 6 months, and as far as I know, nobody touched it again until now. Did you ever find out what happened to Daniel Cross? I tried, but I was already on thin ice with my department for pushing the issue. Cross had moved to Florida, was working private security. I called him once, asked about the night he brought that woman to the hospital. He hung up on me, called my lieutenant to complain about harassment. I got told to drop it. Is Cross still alive? No idea. Haven't thought about him in years. Figured there wasn't any point since nobody wanted to listen to what I had to say. I tapped my pen against my notepad. Detective Holloway, you said the tape shouldn't have gone missing. Do you think someone at the Bureau took it? I think someone didn't want anyone hearing what Patricia told me. Whether that was Bureau, local cops, or someone else entirely, I couldn't tell you. But tapes don't just vanish from federal evidence storage by accident. What exactly did Patricia say on that tape? Holloway was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice was lower. She described the woman who died. Said she was conscious for about an hour after they brought her in, and during that hour, the woman kept saying the same thing over and over. What did she say? They're still there. They're still watching. Patricia said the woman was terrified, kept looking at the door like she expected someone to come in. She died before anyone could get a coherent statement about who they were or what had happened to her. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Did Patricia have any theory about what that meant? Not at the time, but when she came to me in '97, she said something that I've never forgotten. She said, I think I know why she was scared, because I've seen them too. Seen who? She wouldn't elaborate. Said she wanted to tell me everything on the record during the formal interview. She seemed afraid, but also determined, like she'd finally worked up the courage to speak and wasn't going to back down. I told her we'd do the interview on November 10th, that she should call me immediately if she felt unsafe before then. Did she call? No, she just disappeared. I looked down at my notes. A woman witnesses something suspicious in 1983. Stays quiet for 14 years. finally decides to report it in 1997. 2 days later, she's gone, and the only recording of her preliminary statement has vanished from evidence storage. Detective Holloway, do you remember anything else from that interview? Anything that might be relevant? He sighed. Just one thing. At the end of the recording, right before I turned off the tape, Patricia said something that didn't make it into my written report. She said, "If something happens to me, you need to listen to this tape again. Listen to the background, you'll hear it." Hear what? I don't know. I listened to the tape a dozen times after she disappeared. All I heard was our voices, but she was insistent, said I needed to listen carefully, that it was there even if I couldn't hear it at first. You never heard anything unusual? Not that I could identify, but I'm not a sound engineer. Maybe with proper equipment, proper analysis, there was something there. I'll never know now. I thanked Holloway for his time and ended the call. Then I sat at my desk, staring at my notes, trying to make sense of what I'd just learned. A missing tape, a witness who disappeared, a death from 1983 that was ruled accidental but might have been murder, and a cryptic warning about listening to the background of a recording. I needed to find that tape. I spent the next 3 days following every possible lead. I checked with the Syracuse PD to see if they had a copy. They didn't. I contacted the National Archives to see if the tape might have been transferred there. It hadn't. I even reached out to the detective who'd worked Patricia's case at the Bureau after it was transferred from local jurisdiction. He'd retired in 2005 and barely remembered the case. Dead end after dead end. Then I got a call from Marcus Webb, the storage technician. He sounded excited. "I found something," he said. "Not your tape, but maybe related. I was going through old checkout logs, the paper ones from before we digitized everything. There's an entry from November 1997. Someone checked out the Whitmore evidence box. Who? That's the weird part. The signature is illegible, just a scrawl, but there's a badge number next to it. Can you trace the badge number?" Already did. It belonged to an agent named Thomas Garrett. He was with the Bureau from 1989 to 2003. Is he still alive? According to personnel records, he's retired, living in Maryland. Want me to send you his contact info? I told him yes, and hung up. Thomas Garrett. I pulled up his personnel file. He'd worked primarily in the Criminal Investigative Division, specializing in violent crimes and cold cases. His record was clean, commendations for good work, no disciplinary issues. He'd retired at age 55, earlier than required but not suspiciously so. I called the number Webb had sent me. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. I left a message identifying myself and asking him to call me back regarding the Whitmore case. He didn't call back that day, or the next. On the 3rd day, I drove to his address in Maryland. It was a small house in a quiet suburb, the kind of place you'd expect a retired federal agent to settle down. The lawn was overgrown. Mail was piled up in the box by the door. I knocked, no answer. I tried the neighbors. The woman next door said she hadn't seen Mr. Garrett in about 2 weeks. Said he kept to himself mostly, but it wasn't like him to be gone this long without telling anyone. I went back to the car and called my supervisor. I need a wellness check on a retired agent, Thomas Garrett. Something's not right. Reeves approved it. 2 hours later, local police entered Garrett's house. They found it empty. No signs of struggle. No indication of where he'd gone. His car was in the garage. His wallet was on the bedroom dresser. His phone was on the kitchen counter, powered off. Thomas Garrett had vanished. Just like Patricia Whitmore. Just like the tape. I should have dropped it. Filed my report, told the daughter we'd lost the tape, moved on to the next case. That's what Reeves suggested when I briefed him on Garrett's disappearance. "You're chasing connections that might not exist," he said. People retire and go off the grid all the time. Evidence gets lost. Cases go cold. That's the job. But I couldn't let it go. 2 people connected to the same tape, both missing. A witness who'd warned about something being hidden in the recording, and a death from 1983 that nobody wanted to investigate. There was a pattern here. I just couldn't see it yet. I started researching the 1983 case on my own time. The victim's name had been Jennifer Morrow, age 22, unmarried, worked as a waitress at a diner outside Syracuse. The police report said she'd been found on County Road 47 by 2 Good Samaritans who'd driven her to the hospital. She died of internal injuries consistent with being struck by a vehicle. The Good Samaritans were listed as Daniel Cross and James Volker. I pulled up Cross's personnel file from Syracuse PD. He'd joined the force in 1980, worked patrol until 1995, then left for Florida. Unblemished record. No complaints, no disciplinary actions. He died in 2003 of a heart attack. James Volker was harder to trace. He wasn't a cop, just a civilian who'd happened to be with Cross that night. I found a driver's license record showing he'd lived in Syracuse in 1983 but had moved to Pennsylvania sometime in the mid-90s. After that, the trail went cold. I requested the medical examiner's report on Jennifer Morrow. It took a week to arrive, pulled from the county archives and converted to PDF. I read it 3 times, looking for anything that might support Patricia's suspicions. The report was thorough but unremarkable. Multiple fractures consistent with high-impact trauma. Internal bleeding. Cause of death. Blunt force trauma. Manner of death. Accident. But there was one detail that stood out. The attending physician had noted defensive wounds on forearms and hands, possibly sustained when victim attempted to shield herself during impact. Defensive wounds. That suggested Jennifer had seen whatever hit her coming, had raised her arms to protect herself. That was consistent with a traffic accident, but it was also consistent with someone beating her while she tried to defend herself. I called the physician who'd signed the report. He'd long since retired, but I tracked him down to a nursing home in Albany. He was 84 years old and his memory wasn't great, but he remembered the Morrow case. Terrible thing, he said. Young woman like that. I see a lot of trauma cases at the hospital, but that one stuck with me. Do you remember anything unusual about it? Unusual how? The 2 men who brought her in, did they seem credible to you? He thought about it. They seemed nervous, but people are often nervous in hospitals. I didn't think much of it at the time. What about the injuries? You noted defensive wounds. Could those have been caused by something other than a traffic accident? There was a long pause. Are you asking if someone beat that girl? I'm asking if it's possible. Anything's possible. But the coroner ruled it an accident. I deferred to his judgment. But you had doubts. Another pause. I had questions. The pattern of injuries was unusual. Most hit-and-run victims have a primary impact site. But this woman had trauma all over, like she'd been hit multiple times from different angles. I mentioned it to the police, but they said it was consistent with being struck and then rolling across the pavement. Did you believe that? I was a doctor, not a detective. I reported what I saw. What they did with that information was their business. I thanked him and hung up. Then I pulled up the autopsy photos, which had been included in the medical examiner's report. They were brutal, but I forced myself to look closely. The doctor was right. The injuries were all over. Face, torso, arms, legs. If Jennifer had been hit by a car, she must have been hit multiple times or dragged for a significant distance. But the report mentioned no debris in her wounds, no road rash, nothing to suggest she'd been dragged. I was starting to think Patricia Whitmore had been right. This wasn't an accident. Someone had beaten Jennifer Morrow to death, then convinced the authorities it was a hit and run. And 36 years later, people connected to that secret were still disappearing. I needed to find someone who'd been there that night. Someone who might remember details that didn't make it into the official reports. I started calling the hospital, trying to find staff who'd worked there in 1983. Most had retired or moved on. But I eventually reached a former nurse named Dorothy Ellis who remembered the night Jennifer Morrow died. "I wasn't on duty that night," she said. "But Patricia Whitmore was. She talked about it for weeks afterward. Said something about it didn't feel right." "Did she ever say what bothered her?" "Just that the men who brought the girl in were acting strange, and that the girl kept saying things that didn't make sense. Patricia thought maybe she'd been drugged or was in shock." "What kind of things was she saying?" "Patricia never told me specifics, but I remember her saying the poor girl seemed terrified of something. Not in pain terrified, but afraid. Like she thought someone was going to hurt her even though she was already in the hospital." That matched what Holloway had told me. They're still there. They're still watching. Did Patricia ever mention seeing anything herself, anything that frightened her? Dorothy was quiet. Not at the time. But years later, this would have been in the 90s sometime, I ran into Patricia at the grocery store. We chatted for a bit, caught up on our lives, and then she said something odd. She said, "Do you ever feel like you're being watched? Like there's someone just outside your field of vision, and if you turn your head fast enough, you might catch them?" I laughed it off, thought she was joking, but she wasn't laughing. She looked scared. "When was this?" "I don't remember exactly. Maybe 95 or 96. Not long before she disappeared." I felt a chill. Patricia had been afraid for at least a year before she went to the police, and whatever she was afraid of, it had something to do with what Jennifer Morrow had said in 1983. They're still watching. I kept digging. I requested phone records for Patricia Whitmore from the months before her disappearance, hoping to find some pattern or contact that might explain what had happened. The records had been destroyed per retention policy, but I found a summary in the original case file. According to the summary, Patricia had made numerous calls to the Syracuse Police Department in October and November 1997. Most were brief, listed as inquiries regarding case status. She'd also made several calls to the main FBI office in Albany. I pulled up the call logs from our Albany office for that period. Most of the calls Patricia made had gone to the main switchboard, where they'd been logged but not forwarded to any specific agent. Except one. On October 29, 1997, Patricia had spoken with someone in our office for 47 minutes. The call log listed the recipient as T. Garrett. Thomas Garrett, the same agent who'd checked out the evidence box, the same agent who'd disappeared 3 weeks ago. Patricia had talked to Garrett 9 days before her own disappearance, and whatever they'd discussed, it had lasted nearly an hour. I tried calling Garrett's number again. Still no answer. I checked with local police in Maryland. They'd found no trace of him. His bank accounts showed no activity since the day he'd vanished. His credit cards were untouched. He was gone. Just like Patricia. I went back to the evidence storage facility and personally searched through the Whitmore box. I went through every item, every piece of paper, looking for anything that might have been overlooked. At the bottom of the box, underneath some photographs and personal effects, I found a small padded envelope. It was unmarked, unsealed. Inside was a cassette tape. My hands were shaking as I pulled it out. There was no label, no indication of what it contained. But it was the right type of tape, the kind used for police interviews in the 90s. I took it back to my office and found an old cassette player in the supply closet. The tape looked like it had been copied from another source. The quality slightly degraded. But when I pressed play, I heard voices. The first voice was Frank Holloway, identifying himself and the date, November 5th, 1997. The second voice was female, nervous but determined. Please state your name for the record. Patricia Ann Whitmore. And you've come here today to provide information about a case from 1983? Yes. The death of Jennifer Morrow. I was working at the hospital the night she was brought in. I was her nurse. I listened as Patricia described everything Holloway had already told me. The two men who'd brought Jennifer in, the suspicious injuries, the victim's final words about being watched. But then, about 20 minutes into the recording, Patricia said something new. I need to tell you something else, something I haven't told anyone. About a week after Jennifer died, I started noticing things, small things, like someone had been in my house while I was at work. Nothing was missing, but things were moved. A chair pulled out from the table. A window I was sure I'd closed that was now open. My daughter's toys rearranged. Did you report this? No, I thought I was being paranoid. Thought maybe I was misremembering how I'd left things, but it kept happening for months. And then I started seeing someone. A man, tall, maybe 6 feet or more. He'd be standing across the street from my house, or in the parking lot at work. Never close enough for me to get a good look, but close enough that I knew he was there. Watching. My breath caught. I'd heard this before in another case. A tall figure watching from a distance. Did you ever confront this person? Once. I was leaving work late one night and he was standing by my car. I yelled at him, asked what he wanted. He didn't say anything, just stood there. I ran back into the hospital and called security. By the time they came out, he was gone. Can you describe what he looked like? That's the thing, I can't. Every time I try to remember his face, it's like there's nothing there. Just a blur. Even when I was looking right at him, I couldn't make out his features. How long did this continue? About 6 months. And then he just stopped. I didn't see him anymore. I didn't have that feeling of being watched. It was like he'd lost interest or moved on to someone else. I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But you don't think that anymore. No, because I've started seeing him again. About 3 months ago. Same man, same way of watching from a distance, and this time I'm not going to ignore it. This time I'm going to find out who he is and what he wants. The recording continued with Holloway asking standard questions, but I was barely listening anymore. My mind was racing. Patricia had been watched after Jennifer Morrow's death. For 6 months. Then it stopped. Then, 14 years later, it started again. Right around the time she decided to come forward about what she'd witnessed, and then she disappeared. I listened to the rest of the tape. At the very end, after Holloway had officially concluded the interview, there was about 30 seconds of ambient sound before the recording cut off. Just the hum of the room, the shuffle of papers. And then, something else. It was faint, almost inaudible. A sound like breathing, but not from Patricia or Holloway. It was in the background, distant but distinct. Slow, steady breaths, like someone else was in the room with them. I rewound the tape and listened again. The breathing was there, consistent, rhythmic, but neither Patricia nor Holloway seemed to notice it. They continued their conversation as if nothing was wrong. I played it a third time, turning the volume up as high as it would go. This time, I caught something else. In between the breaths, there was a very faint sound, almost like a word, whispered so quietly it was barely there. I couldn't make it out, but it was definitely a voice. A third voice that shouldn't have been on the recording. This was what Patricia had meant. Listen to the background, you'll hear it. She'd known something was there. Something that had been in the room with them during the interview. Something she couldn't see but could somehow sense. I ejected the tape and sat back, my heart pounding. I needed to get this analyzed properly, by someone with better equipment than an old cassette player in an FBI office. But more than that, I needed to find out what had happened to Thomas Garrett. Because he'd heard this tape. He'd checked out the evidence box, presumably to listen to it. And then he'd vanished, just like Patricia Whitmore. I made a copy of the tape using another old cassette recorder I found in storage. Then I locked the original in my desk drawer. I wasn't taking any chances with this disappearing like the first one had. That night, I took the copy home and listened to it again on my laptop, using audio editing software to isolate and enhance the background sounds. It took me 3 hours, but eventually I managed to boost the faint whisper enough to make out what it was saying. It repeated the same phrase over and over, in a voice that didn't sound quite human. Still watching, still here, still watching, still here. I played it back a dozen times, trying to convince myself I was hearing it wrong. But there was no mistake. Someone, or something, had been in that room, had been there while Patricia gave her statement, had been breathing, whispering, announcing its presence. And Patricia had known. That's why she'd told Holloway to listen carefully. That's why she'd been so insistent about recording everything. She'd been trying to leave evidence of what was happening to her. Evidence that whatever had watched Jennifer Morrow, whatever had driven her to her death, was now watching Patricia too. And now it had taken her. I looked at my laptop screen, at the audio waveform with its strange, regular pattern of whispered words. I thought about Thomas Garrett, who'd listened to this tape and then disappeared. I thought about Frank Holloway, who'd interviewed Patricia and then been warned off the case by his superiors. I thought about Daniel Cross and James Volker, the 2 men who'd brought a dying woman to the hospital, claiming they'd found her on the road. And I thought about Jennifer Morrow's last words. They're still there. They're still watching. Not he, they. Plural. I was beginning to understand why this case had stayed cold for 36 years. I didn't go to work the next day. Instead, I drove back to Syracuse. I needed to find James Volker, the man who'd been with Daniel Cross the night they brought Jennifer Morrow to the hospital. Cross was dead, but Volker might still be alive. I tracked him to a small town in Pennsylvania about 4 hours from Syracuse. His address was listed in a public records database as a house on Maple Street in a town I'd never heard of. I called ahead, but the number was disconnected. I drove there anyway. The house was a small ranch-style place, well-maintained. With a neat lawn and flowers and window boxes, I knocked on the door. A woman in her 70s answered, looking at me with friendly suspicion. "Can I help you?" I showed her my credentials. "I'm looking for James Volker. I understand he lives here." Her expression changed. Jim passed away 3 years ago. My heart sank. "I'm sorry for your loss. Were you his wife?" "Sister. He lived with me after his wife died. Can I ask what this is about?" "I'm investigating an old case from 1983. Your brother was a witness. I was hoping to ask him some questions." She shook her head. "I don't think he would have been able to help you. Jim had dementia for the last 5 years of his life. Couldn't remember much of anything." "Did he ever talk about an incident in Syracuse? A young woman who died after being hit by a car?" The woman's face went pale. "How did you know about that?" "It's in the police records. Your brother and a man named Daniel Cross found the victim and took her to the hospital." "That's not what happened." She said it quietly, almost to herself. "What do you mean?" She looked past me, out at the street, like she was checking to make sure no one was listening. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. "You should come inside." I followed her into a small, tidy living room. Family photos covered the walls. She gestured for me to sit on the couch and took a chair across from me. Jim didn't like to talk about that night, she said. But after his wife passed and he came to live with me, he started having these episodes. The dementia, you know. He'd get confused about when he was, start talking about things from years ago like they'd just happened. And he kept coming back to that night in 1983. What did he say? He said he'd done something terrible, that he'd helped cover up a murder, that Daniel had made him lie to the police, had threatened him if he ever told the truth. I leaned forward. Did he say what really happened? She nodded slowly. According to Jim, they didn't find that girl on the road. They were there when she was hurt. Daniel had been seeing her apparently. Some kind of affair. Jim was there that night because Daniel had called him, said he needed help with something. When Jim arrived, the girl was already injured, lying on the ground. Daniel said it was an accident, that she'd fallen, but Jim said the injuries were too severe for a simple fall. Did he say how she was really injured? He claimed he didn't see it happen, just that when he got there she was already dying. Daniel told him they had to get her to the hospital, make it look like they'd found her on the road. Jim was scared, didn't know what else to do, so he went along with it. Why didn't he tell the truth later? Daniel was a police officer. He had friends on the force. He told Jim that if he ever spoke about what really happened, he'd make sure Jim went to prison for it. That he'd say Jim was the one who hurt her. And Jim believed him. He was just a regular guy, worked at a factory, had a wife and kids. He wasn't going to risk everything to tell the truth about a girl he didn't even know. Did he ever mention anyone else being involved, anyone else who was there that night? She frowned. That's the strange part. Sometimes when he talked about it, he'd say there were others, but he could never describe who they were or what they looked like. It was like his mind couldn't hold on to the details. He'd just say they were watching, or they were there, but when I'd ask who they were, he'd get agitated and change the subject. The hair on my arm stood up. Did he ever seem afraid when he talked about this? Terrified. Especially toward the end. He'd wake up in the middle of the night screaming about someone watching him. I'd ask who, and he'd say he couldn't see their faces, that they were always just outside his line of sight. The doctors said it was the dementia, hallucinations, but Jim was convinced they were real. Did he mention Patricia Whitmore? She was the nurse who treated Jennifer Morrow. The woman shook her head. That name doesn't sound familiar, but Jim did say something once that stuck with me. He said, everyone who was there that night, they all paid for it eventually. All of us. I asked what he meant, but he wouldn't explain. I thought about that. Jennifer Morrow was dead. Daniel Cross was dead. James Volker was dead. Patricia Whitmore had disappeared. Thomas Garrett had disappeared. Everyone connected to that night, gone. Did your brother keep any records from that time? Anything that might help me understand what happened? He had a box of old things in the basement. Papers, photos, that kind of stuff. I was going to throw it out after he died, but I never got around to it. You're welcome to look through it if you think it might help. She led me down to the basement and showed me to a corner where several boxes were stacked. The one marked Jim's Things was on top. I opened it and started going through the contents. Most of it was what you'd expect. Old tax returns, letters, a few photographs of his family. But near the bottom, I found something interesting. It was a small notebook, the kind you'd buy at a drugstore. The pages were yellowed and some of the ink had faded, but it was still legible. It appeared to be a journal of some kind, with entries dating from 1983 to the early 90s. I flipped through it carefully. Most of the entries were mundane, notes about work and family. But there were a few that stood out. November 15th, 1983. Can't sleep. Keep thinking about that night. Daniel says I need to forget about it. Move on. But I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. She was so scared, not of dying, of something else. March 3rd, 1984. Saw him again today, standing across the street from the factory. Same man I saw that night, or someone who looks just like him. Tall, wearing a long coat, just standing there. I tried to get a better look, but by the time I crossed the street, he was gone. Maybe I'm going crazy. July 22nd, 1984. Daniel called, said I need to stop asking questions. Said it's over and we both need to let it stay over. But it's not over. I know it's not. Because they're still there, I can feel them watching. The entries continued sporadically through the years. Volker describing a presence that followed him, a tall figure he'd see from a distance but could never quite focus on. His growing paranoia, his fear that whatever had happened that night in 1983 wasn't finished. The last entry was dated April 15th, 1997, just months before Patricia Whitmore went to the police. I'm writing this down in case something happens to me, in case they finally decide I've been quiet long enough. What we did that night, helping Daniel cover up what happened, it marked us. All of us who were there. We're being watched. We've always been watched. And one by one, we're being taken. First Jennifer, then eventually the rest of us. Daniel thinks he's safe because he's a cop, because he has power. But he's wrong. They don't care about power, they just care about witnesses. And I'm a witness, we all are. God help us. I photographed every page of the journal with my phone. Then I showed it to Volker's sister. Did you know he felt this way? I asked. She looked at the journal with sad eyes. I knew he was troubled, but I thought it was just guilt over the lie he'd told. I didn't realize there was more to it. I thanked her and left, driving back toward Syracuse as the sun set. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what I'd learned. Jennifer Morrow had been killed in 1983, possibly by Daniel Cross, possibly by someone else. James Volker had helped cover it up. Patricia Whitmore had witnessed something that night, something that made her afraid. And then, for years afterward, everyone connected to that night had been watched by something they couldn't quite identify or describe. A tall figure, always at a distance, always watching. And eventually, they all disappeared or died. I thought about the voice on the tape. Still watching. Still here. What if it wasn't someone watching them? What if it was something? Something that had been there that night, had witnessed what happened to Jennifer Morrow, and was now systematically eliminating everyone else who'd been there. But that didn't make sense. Things like that didn't exist. There had to be a rational explanation. Except, I couldn't think of one that fit all the facts. I was halfway back to Syracuse when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Static. Then a voice, distant and distorted, like it was coming from very far away. You listened to the tape. It wasn't a question. My heart started pounding. Who is this? You heard the third voice. You know what it means. What does it mean? It means you're next. You've been marked now, just like the others. We can see you. We? The ones who watch. The ones who were there. The ones who are always there. This is a bad joke, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Some kind of sick prank. Patricia Whitmore thought it was a joke too, at first. Then she started seeing us. Then she tried to warn people. Then she was gone. Where is she? What did you do to her? We didn't do anything. We never do anything. We just watch and wait. And eventually you all come to us. Because that's what witnesses do. They try to understand. They try to prove what they saw. And the more they try, the closer they get, until there's no distance left between us. The line went dead. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking. I wanted to believe it was a prank, some sick individual who'd somehow learned about my investigation. But the voice had known about the tape, had known I'd listened to it, just like someone had known Thomas Garrett had listened to it. I sat there in my car for a long time, trying to decide what to do. I could report the call, tell Reeves everything I'd found, ask for help. But help doing what? Investigating a voice on a phone? Tracking down something that witnesses described as impossible to see clearly? Instead, I called Frank Holloway. He answered on the second ring. "Agent Nolan, I was wondering when I'd hear from you again." "I found a copy of the tape," I said. "The Patricia Whitmore interview." Silence, then, "Where?" "In the evidence box. It was hidden under some other items. I think someone made a copy before the original disappeared." "Have you listened to it?" "Yes. All of it, including the end, where you can hear the third voice." "Jesus." His voice was tight. "You enhanced it? You heard what it was saying?" "Still watching, still here, over and over." I was afraid of that. I could never make it out on the original, the quality wasn't good enough. But I knew something was there. Patricia knew too. That's why she wanted it recorded. "Detective Holloway, what did you really think happened to Patricia?" He was quiet for a long time. "You want the official answer or the truth?" "The truth." "The truth is, I think she was right. I think there was something watching her. Something connected to what happened to Jennifer Morrow. And I think when she tried to expose it, when she tried to get people to listen, it took her." "Do you think it was a person? Someone trying to silence witnesses?" "I used to think that. It's what I told myself for years. But I've seen too many cases like this. People who report being followed by something they can't quite see. People who hear voices they can't quite identify, and then they disappear. Not all at once, but eventually. And there's never any evidence, never any explanation, just gone. How many cases?" I stopped counting after 20. And those are just the ones I know about. The ones I worked or heard about from other detectives. There could be hundreds more. Why doesn't anyone talk about this? Why isn't there an investigation? There are investigations. They just don't go anywhere. Because how do you investigate something you can't see? How do you track something that exists just outside everyone's field of vision? You end up looking crazy. You end up like me, retired early because I couldn't let it go. "I got a phone call," I said. "About an hour ago. Someone who knew I'd listened to the tape. They said I was next." Holloway sighed heavily. "Then you need to make a choice. You can walk away from this, delete the copy you made, pretend you never heard that third voice, or you can keep investigating and accept that you've probably put yourself on the same path as Patricia Whitmore. What would you do?" I already made my choice. I walked away, and I've spent the last 25 years wondering if I could have saved her if I'd just been braver, if I'd just pushed harder. Did you ever see it? The thing that was watching? Once, the day after Patricia disappeared. I went to her house, looked around even though it wasn't officially a crime scene yet, and as I was leaving, I saw someone standing at the end of the street. Tall, wearing what looked like a long coat. I started walking toward him, and the closer I got, the more my vision seemed to blur, like my eyes couldn't focus on him properly. By the time I got to where he'd been standing, there was nothing there, just empty street. But you felt something. I felt watched, like there were eyes on me even though I couldn't see anyone. And I had this overwhelming sense that if I kept investigating, if I kept trying to see clearly what I wasn't supposed to see, I'd end up like Patricia. So I stopped. I let the case go cold. And I've regretted it ever since. I looked out my car window at the darkening sky. I don't think I can walk away. I know. That's why I'm telling you this, because someone should know the truth even if they can't prove it. Someone should understand what happened to Patricia and Thomas Garrett and all the others, even if that understanding costs them everything. What do I do? Document everything. Make copies of everything. And whatever you do, don't listen to that tape again. Once was enough to mark you. Listening again, studying it, trying to enhance it further, that's asking it to come closer. And you don't want that. It's too late, I said. I already enhanced it. I isolated the voice. Holloway was silent for a moment. Then God help you, Agent Nolan, because you've done exactly what it wants. You've proven you can hear it, and now it knows you're paying attention. We ended the call. I sat in my car for another 20 minutes, trying to decide what to do. Every logical instinct I had said to drive to the office, turn in the tape, write up my findings, and request reassignment to a different case. But I couldn't do that, because Patricia Whitmore had tried to warn people, had tried to leave evidence, had tried to make someone listen, and no one had. She'd disappeared trying to expose the truth, and 36 years later, the truth was still buried. I started the car and drove back to Syracuse. I had one more person I needed to talk to, one more piece of the puzzle I needed to find. I needed to know what Jennifer Morrow had seen before she died, and I needed to know if anyone else had been in that hospital room with her and Patricia Whitmore the night it all started. I spent the next week tracking down everyone who'd worked at the hospital the night Jennifer Morrow died. Most were retired or deceased, but I found 3 nurses and 1 doctor who'd been on duty that night. None of them remembered anything unusual about the case itself. But 2 of them remembered Patricia Whitmore's behavior afterward. She was different after that night, one nurse told me. Quiet, jumpy, she kept looking over her shoulder like she expected someone to be standing behind her. Did she ever say what was bothering her? Not directly, but I heard her talking to herself once. I was walking past the break room and she was in there alone, and I heard her say, "I know you're there. I can feel you watching me." When I asked who she was talking to, she said she was just thinking out loud, but she looked terrified. The doctor who'd been on duty gave me a similar account. Patricia asked me once if I believed in things we couldn't see, like presences or spirits or something like that. I told her I believed in what I could diagnose and treat. She got very quiet and said, "Then you're lucky, because you'll never see what I see." I asked her what she meant, but she wouldn't explain. One former nurse, a woman named Helen Grant, remembered something more specific. There was something strange about the room where that girl died, she said. For weeks afterward, none of the staff wanted to work in there. Not because of the death itself, we dealt with death all the time, but because of the feeling in that room, like you were being watched, like there was someone standing in the corner even when the room was empty. Did you feel it? Once. I had to go in there to restock supplies about a month after the girl died. I was alone, it was late, and I swear I heard someone breathing. Not loud, just this quiet, steady breathing. I looked around, but there was no one there. I finished what I was doing and got out as fast as I could. Never went in there alone again. What happened to the room? Nothing. It's still there, far as I know. The hospital expanded over the years, but that wing is still in use. I thanked her and drove to the hospital. It took some convincing, but I eventually got permission from the administrator to visit the old wing where Jennifer Morrow had died. The room number was in the medical records, 237. The wing was older, less modern than the new sections of the hospital. The walls were painted in the bland, institutional colors of the 80s, scuffed and faded. Room 237 was at the end of a hallway, and as I approached it, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The room was currently unoccupied. I stood in the doorway, looking in. It was a standard hospital room. Bed, monitor equipment, a chair for visitors. Nothing unusual about it at all. Except for the feeling that I wasn't alone. I stepped inside and the feeling intensified. It was like being watched by someone standing just behind me. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there. The air felt heavy, oppressive. I pulled out my phone and started recording video, slowly panning around the room. I didn't know what I expected to capture, but I needed to document this feeling, this presence. As I completed the pan, I noticed something on the video screen that I hadn't seen with my naked eye. In the corner of the room, in the playback, there was a shadow. It wasn't a shadow cast by anything in the room, it was just there, a dark shape roughly the size of a person. I looked up from my phone to the actual corner. Nothing. Looked back at the screen. The shadow was still there. I played back the video. The shadow remained in the corner throughout, unmoving, and as I enhanced the image, zooming in on that dark area, I could make out something that made my blood run cold. It looked like a face. Blurred, indistinct, but definitely a face. Tall and elongated with dark hollow spaces where eyes should be. I took screenshots and then forced myself to walk to the corner where the shadow appeared in the video. I held up my phone, filming, and slowly approached. The closer I got, the more the feeling of being watched intensified. My breath started coming faster. My hands were shaking. And then I heard it. Breathing. The same slow, steady breathing from the tape. I spun around, expecting to see someone behind me. The room was empty, but the breathing continued. And then, barely audible, a whisper. "Still here?" I ran. I don't remember making the decision to run. But suddenly I was out of the room, down the hallway, not stopping until I was outside the hospital, gasping for air in the parking lot. I looked at my phone. The video was still recording. I stopped it and played back the last few seconds. On the screen, I could see myself standing in the corner. And behind me, just over my shoulder, was that shadow. That tall, dark shape with the blurred face. It had been right there, right behind me. I got in my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going, I just needed to move, to get away from that room and that presence and that voice. I ended up at my hotel, locked the door, closed all the curtains. I sat on the bed with my laptop and my phone, trying to make sense of what I'd experienced. This wasn't a person. This wasn't someone covering up a crime or silencing witnesses in any conventional sense. This was something else. Something that existed in the spaces between what we can see and what we know is there. Something that had been in that room the night Jennifer Morrow died and had been watching everyone connected to that night ever since. I thought about Patricia Whitmore, trying to warn people about what she'd seen, about the tape she'd made, with that third voice hidden in the background, about how she'd disappeared 2 days before she was supposed to give a formal statement. I thought about Thomas Garrett, checking out the evidence box, presumably listening to the tape, vanishing shortly after. And I thought about the phone call I'd received. "You've been marked now, just like the others." I pulled up the video I'd taken in the hospital room and watched it again. The shadow was there in every frame, always in the periphery, always just out of focus, and at the end, when I'd heard the breathing and the whisper, the shadow had moved. I could see it in the video, even though I hadn't noticed it at the time. It had moved closer to me. I was downloading the video to my laptop when my phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at it, my heart pounding. I knew I shouldn't answer. Knew that every time I engaged with this, I was pulling myself deeper into something I didn't understand. But I answered anyway. "Hello?" The breathing. That same slow, steady breathing from the tape. "I know what you are," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I know you were there that night. You saw what happened to Jennifer Morrow. The breathing continued. What do you want? Why are you doing this? A long pause, then that distant, distorted voice. We don't want anything. We don't do anything. We just watch. We've always watched, since before you had words for what we are. Then why do people disappear? Why did Patricia Whitmore disappear? She didn't disappear. She's still here. They're all still here. You just can't see them yet. What does that mean? It means the more you look, the more you'll see. The more you listen, the more you'll hear. And eventually, you'll be able to see all of us, all the ones who are still here, still watching. And then you'll understand. Understand what? That there's no distance anymore. No separation between you and us. You've listened too carefully. You've seen too clearly. Now you're part of it. The line went dead. I sat there, phone in my hand, trying to process what I'd just heard. They're all still here. Patricia, Thomas Garrett, all the others who'd disappeared. Not dead, not taken somewhere. Still here. Just invisible to everyone except whatever these things were. I pulled up the enhanced audio from the tape and listened to it again. Still watching. Still here. Not a threat, a statement of fact. They were still here, all of them, existing in some space adjacent to ours, visible only to whatever was watching them. And now, apparently, I could see them too. I opened my laptop and started writing. Everything I'd found, everything I'd learned, everything I'd experienced. I uploaded it to a secure cloud server, sent copies to email addresses I'd created specifically for this purpose. Because if I disappeared, when I disappeared, someone needed to know what had happened. Someone needed to have this evidence. I was finishing my documentation when I noticed something in the corner of my hotel room, a shadow that shouldn't be there, the same tall, dark shape I'd seen in the hospital room. I looked directly at it. For the first time, I could almost make out details, the suggestion of a face, the outline of a body. It was watching me. I looked away, focused on my laptop. When I glanced back, the shadow was closer. Every time I looked away and then back, it was closer. I forced myself to keep working, to finish documenting everything. But I could feel it there, getting closer, the presence becoming more solid, more real. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. You're almost there. Soon you'll see everything. Soon you'll be still here with us. I looked up from my phone. The shadow was right beside me now, close enough that I should be able to touch it. Close enough that I could see its face clearly for the first time. It had my face. Not exactly, but close enough. Like looking at a reflection that was slightly off, slightly wrong. And then I understood. This wasn't something that had been watching us. This was what we became when we looked too closely, when we listened too carefully, when we saw what we weren't meant to see. This was Patricia Whitmore, Thomas Garrett, James Volker after his death, Jennifer Morrow after hers. All of them, still here, transformed into the very thing they'd been trying to escape. The shadow, my future, reached out toward me. I closed my laptop and stood up. I could run, but I knew it wouldn't matter. I could try to explain this to someone, but who would believe me? I pulled out my phone one last time and called Frank Holloway. He answered immediately. Agent Nolan, I need you to listen carefully. I'm sending you everything I've found. All my files, all my evidence. If I disappear, if you can't reach me, you need to make sure someone gets this information. What's happening? I can see them now. The ones who are still here, and I think I'm about to join them. Get out of there, right now. Get in your car and drive as far as you can. It won't matter. They're not in a place I can drive away from. They're here. They've always been here. We just can't see them until we become them. Agent Nolan, tell Patricia's daughter I tried. Tell her that her mother was brave and she was right, and I'm sorry I couldn't save her. I hung up. The shadow was touching me now, and I could feel myself changing. Feel the world shifting, becoming both more and less visible at the same time. I could see them now. All of them. Standing in corners, sitting in chairs that appeared empty, walking down hallways that everyone else saw as vacant. Patricia Whitmore was here, sitting on my hotel bed, watching me with eyes that were both present and absent. Thomas Garrett was here, standing by the window. Jennifer Morrow was here, her face still showing the fear she'd died with, the knowledge of what was happening to her. And so many others, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all existing in this space between visible and invisible, all still watching, all still here. "I'm sorry," Patricia said. Her voice was like the breathing on the tape, distant but clear. "I tried to warn you, just like Jennifer tried to warn me, but warnings don't work, because the only way to understand is to see, and once you see," she didn't finish. She didn't need to. I felt my body becoming less substantial, less anchored to the world I'd known. I could still see my hotel room, but I could also see other rooms, other places, layered on top of each other like transparencies. And in every place, in every layer, there were more of them. More people who'd looked too closely, listened too carefully, seen what they shouldn't have seen. I've been with the Bureau for 16 years, and I've learned that the worst cases aren't the ones that end badly. They're the ones that don't end at all. The ones that sit in evidence storage for decades, gathering dust, their victims forgotten by everyone except the families who still call every anniversary asking if we've found anything new. My name is Agent David Miller, and for the past 8 months I've been assigned to the Behavioral Analysis Unit's Cold Case Division. It's thankless work. Most days I sit in a windowless office in the basement of our DC headquarters, reading through files that smell like mildew and old coffee, looking for connections that dozens of investigators before me have already missed. In March, on a gray Tuesday morning that felt like every other gray Tuesday morning, my supervisor walked into my office and dropped a cardboard box on my desk. The box was old, the kind with a lid that doesn't quite fit anymore, and inside were 15 manila folders, each one thick with reports and photographs. "What am I looking at?" I asked. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Pattern recognition software flagged these cases about 6 years ago. 3 different analysts have reviewed them since then. All 3 said there's nothing there, but the system keeps flagging them every time we run a new query. "So you want me to prove the computer wrong?" "I want you to figure out why it keeps flagging them, fresh eyes. You've got a good record with cold cases. See if you can find what the others missed." I opened the first folder. The tab read, Brennan, Michael, Portland, or 1979. Inside was a crime scene photo. A man in his early 40s lying on a bathroom floor, wrists and throat cut. The medical examiner had ruled it homicide staged to look like suicide. The wounds were too deep, too clean, inflicted by someone else. But there were no suspects, no witnesses, no apparent motive. The second folder, Delano, Sarah, Columbus, OH, 1983. A woman in her mid-30s found in her bedroom with a plastic bag secured over her head with duct tape. Ruled homicide. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, no clear reason why anyone would want her dead. The third folder, Hayes, Robert, Albuquerque, NM, 1987. A man in his 50s, blunt force trauma to the head in a motel room. The room had been ransacked, but nothing was taken. His wallet, watch, and jewelry were all still there. I spent the rest of that day going through all 15 files, making notes, looking for commonalities. By the time I left the office that night, I'd found several. Every victim was between 35 and 55 years old. Every victim was killed in their home or temporary residence. Every crime scene had been staged in some way. Suicide made to look like murder. Murder made to look like accident. Accident made to look like murder. The killer, if it was the same person, seemed to want confusion rather than concealment. But there were smaller details that bothered me more. In every single case, the time of death was estimated between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m., the deepest part of the night, when most people are in their heaviest sleep. In every case, the victim had been alone. No roommates, no family members present, no witnesses who heard or saw anything unusual. In every case, the front door was found unlocked the next morning, despite family members or neighbors insisting the victim was meticulous about security. And in every case, this is what made me pause and go back through the files again, the victim had recently returned from a trip. Michael Brennan had been at a sales conference in Seattle. He'd flown home on a Tuesday. His body was found Thursday morning. Sarah Delano had visited her sister in Miami. She'd returned on a Sunday. She was found dead on Tuesday. Robert Hayes had attended a business meeting in Denver. He'd driven home on a Friday. His body was discovered Sunday afternoon. I made a timeline, plotting each victim's travel schedule against the date of death. The pattern was undeniable. Every single victim had been away from home for at least 3 days in the week before they died, and every single one had been killed within 48 hours of returning. I pulled up the pattern recognition report that had originally flagged these cases. It was dated 1998, written by an analyst named Margaret Keene. The report was brief, almost dismissive. 15 homicides, 1979 to 1996, share multiple commonalities in victim demographics, timing, and circumstances. However, geographic distribution and lack of forensic connections suggest coincidental similarities rather than a connected series. Recommend monitoring for additional cases. Status: inactive, pending new evidence. Something about the language bothered me. It read like someone writing an official report while deliberately leaving things unsaid, like she'd found something she couldn't put in writing. I looked up Margaret Keene in the personnel database. Retired in 2003 after 28 years with the Bureau. I found a phone number listed in Virginia and called it that afternoon. Yes? A woman's voice, cautious. Is this Margaret Keene? Who's asking? Agent David Miller, FBI. I'm reviewing some of your old casework, the pattern recognition report from 1998, the 15 homicides. Do you have a few minutes to talk about it? There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Which analyst are you? She finally asked. I'm sorry. Which number? How many analysts have reviewed that file before you? 3, according to my supervisor. And they all told you there was nothing there, right? They said the cases appeared unconnected. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course they did, because that's what you have to say if you want to keep your job. Agent Miller, are you calling from your office? Yes. Then we can't have this conversation over the phone. Not really. If you want to know what I actually found, you need to come see me. In person, alone. And don't mention this conversation to anyone, especially not your supervisor. Miss Keene, tomorrow. I'll text you my address. Come in the morning. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, trying to decide if I'd just spoken with a paranoid retiree or someone who had a legitimate reason to be cautious. I looked at the 15 files spread across my desk, at the pattern I'd already started to see, and I knew I'd be making the drive to Virginia. The next morning, I told my supervisor I was following up on some background interviews for another case. I didn't mention Margaret Keene. Something about her tone on the phone had convinced me she was right to be careful. Her house was a small ranch in a quiet neighborhood about 45 minutes from D.C. When she opened the door, I saw a woman in her mid-70s, lean and sharp-eyed, with the kind of posture that comes from decades in federal law enforcement. She studied me for a long moment before stepping aside. "You came alone?" "Like you asked." "Good. Follow me." She led me through a neat living room to what must have been a spare bedroom that she'd converted into an office. The walls were covered floor to ceiling with maps, photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. Red strings connected different points on the maps. Victim photos were arranged in chronological order. It looked like the workspace of someone who'd never really retired, who'd been working a case in secret for years. "This is what I've been doing since I left the bureau," she said, watching my face. "The cases I couldn't solve, the patterns everyone else refused to see." I walked closer to the wall. I recognized the 15 victims from my files, but there were more. Many more. Dozens of photographs, each with a name, date, and location written beneath it. "How many?" I asked. 41 confirmed cases, possibly 63 if I include the ones where I can't access complete records. All of them following the same pattern you've already noticed. All of them officially unsolved. 41 murders with the same MO and nobody's made the connection? She turned to look at me. "Oh, people have made the connection. I'm the fourth analyst to identify this pattern. But every time someone gets close to proving it, something happens. The investigator gets reassigned, or they request a transfer, or they retire early." She gestured to herself. "Like I did, because the alternative is worse." "What alternative?" "You'll understand soon enough. Let me show you what I found." For the next 2 hours, she walked me through her research. She'd identified 41 homicides between 1979 and 2019 that matched the core pattern. But she'd gone deeper than the official case files, finding details that previous investigators had either missed or chosen to ignore. Every single victim, she said, pointing to a detailed timeline on her wall, had a gap in their travel records, unexplained time during their trips that can't be accounted for. She showed me Michael Brennan's case. He'd attended a conference in Seattle from Monday to Wednesday, but his hotel records showed he'd checked out Tuesday evening, and he hadn't caught his flight home until Thursday afternoon, 36 hours unaccounted for. Sarah Delano had visited her sister in Miami for a week, but according to her sister's statement, Sarah had been gone for approximately 6 hours on the third day, saying she needed to run an errand. She'd returned acting strange, distracted. The sister couldn't remember where Sarah had said she was going. Robert Hayes had checked out of his Denver hotel 2 days early and driven home instead of flying as planned. The drive should have taken 12 hours. It took him nearly 24. No explanation for the extra time. "I tracked down credit card records for 10 of the victims," Keene said. "Every single one made purchases or had charges from small towns outside their main destination. Motels in places they had no reason to visit. Gas stations in the middle of nowhere. And there's never any explanation for why they went to these places." "Did you try to interview people in those towns? Find out what the victims were doing there?" "I tried, but by the time I started investigating, most of these cases were years old. Nobody remembered anything. The motels had changed ownership. The gas stations had closed. It was like the victims had deliberately chosen places where they wouldn't be remembered." She pulled out another folder, this one containing crime scene photographs from a dozen different cases. "Look at these carefully." I studied the photos. Different victims, different locations, different methods of death. But as I went through them, I started to notice something odd. In the background of almost every photo, there were small inconsistencies. Objects that appeared in later photos but not in early ones. A coffee cup on a table that hadn't been there during the initial police response. A window that was closed in one photo and open in another despite the crime scene being secured. A chair that had clearly been moved between shots. Crime scene contamination, I suggested. That's what the reports all say. Officer error, faulty memory, but it happens in every case, Agent Miller, every single one. Things move, objects appear and disappear, and nobody can explain it. What about the forensic teams? They must have noticed. 8 of these cases had continuous video documentation of the crime scene processing, standard procedure in suspicious deaths. And in every single one of those 8 cases, the cameras malfunctioned at some point during the investigation. She showed me incident reports, cameras recording static instead of video, timestamps that jumped forward inexplicably, footage that was corrupted or missing entirely. In every instance, when the recording resumed, subtle changes had occurred in the crime scene. I felt a chill. That's not possible. I know it's not, but it happened anyway. She pulled out another folder, thicker than the others. This is what I found that convinced me I could never include it in an official report. If I had, they would have pulled me from every case I was working on and probably ordered a psychological evaluation. Inside were witness statements, dozens of them, collected over years of personal investigation. Keene had tracked down neighbors, co-workers, family members of the victims, people who'd been interviewed initially but whose statements had been deemed irrelevant to the investigations. A neighbor of Michael Brennan reported seeing someone standing outside his apartment building on the night before his death. She'd noticed because the person had been there for hours, from around midnight until at least 3 in the morning when she'd finally gone to bed. Just standing there under a streetlight, not moving. She'd assumed it was someone waiting for a ride, but when she looked out again in the morning, the person was gone. When asked to describe the figure, she'd said it was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, and wearing what looked like a long dark coat. But when pressed for more details about the face or build, she'd become uncertain. I couldn't quite make it out, she'd told Keene, even though the streetlight was right there. It was like my eyes wouldn't focus on them properly. Sarah Delano had confided in a co-worker in the week before her death. She'd said she felt like she was being followed. Not by anyone specific, she could never get a clear look at the person, but she had the persistent sensation of being watched. The co-worker had suggested she was being paranoid, stressed from work. Sarah had insisted it was real. Robert Hayes had made multiple calls to his motel's front desk on the night before his death. The night manager had logged all of them. Hayes reported that someone was knocking on his door. The manager sent security to check the hallway. The cameras showed no one there, but Hayes called back 20 minutes later, insisting the knocking had resumed. This happened 3 more times throughout the night. The final call came at 3:47 a.m. Hayes sounded terrified. "They're still out there," he'd said. "I can hear them even though I can't see them on the peephole. How is that possible?" Security checked one final time. The hallway was empty. Hayes was found dead less than 12 hours later. "These statements weren't in the official case files?" I asked. Some were mentioned briefly, then dismissed as irrelevant. Others I found by re-interviewing witnesses years later. I asked if they remembered anything unusual, anything that might not have seemed important at the time. And the same details kept coming up. The sense of being watched. Figures seen from a distance but never clearly. People standing in places they shouldn't be, at hours when nobody should be standing around. It sounds like the victims were being stalked. That's what I thought initially. But stalkers leave evidence. They make mistakes. They get caught on camera or spotted by witnesses who can provide descriptions. These cases have none of that. It's like whatever was watching these people existed just outside the range of normal observation, in the peripheral vision, in the blind spots. She opened another folder, this one containing medical records. I also pulled the victims' medical histories. I wanted to see if there were any health issues in common, anything that might explain why they were targeted. And in 36 of the 41 cases, the victim developed sleep disorders after their unexplained travel gap. Insomnia, night terrors, sleep paralysis. Several victims reported to their doctors that they were having vivid, disturbing dreams, but couldn't remember the details when they woke up. And in almost every case, these sleep issues started during or immediately after their trips. I looked at the medical records she'd spread across her desk. Prescription sleeping pills, referrals to sleep specialists, notes from doctors concerned about their patients' deteriorating mental health. They went somewhere, I said slowly, during those missing hours. They experienced something, and it affected them deeply enough to disrupt their sleep, to make them paranoid. And then, within 2 days of getting home, they were dead. That's the pattern, Keene agreed. But I could never prove where they went or what happened to them. It's like those hours simply don't exist in any official record. No paper trail, no witnesses, nothing. She walked to her window and looked out at the quiet suburban street. Agent Miller, I need to tell you something about the other analysts who investigated this pattern before me. I tracked them down after I retired. Wanted to compare notes, see if they'd found anything I'd missed. Did they talk to you? 2 refused completely. Hung up as soon as I mentioned the cases. The third one, a man named Robert Chen, he agreed to meet me. We had coffee in Arlington. He looked 20 years older than he should have, and he spent the whole time glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to be listening. What did he tell you? He said he'd identified the pattern in 1991. Found 18 cases that matched. Started investigating on his own time, same as I did. He even went to one of the towns where a victim had those unexplained hours. A little place in Montana, population around 12,000. What happened there? He said it looked like any other small town. Normal people, normal businesses. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Like everyone there knew a secret they weren't sharing. And while he was there, he started feeling watched. Not by anyone he could see, but the sensation was overwhelming. He left after less than an hour. Did he find anything? No. But 3 days after he got back to D.C., he woke up in his car on the side of I-95, about 50 miles from his house. He had no memory of how he got there or what he'd been doing. The last thing he remembered was going to bed the night before. 8 hours just gone. I felt my chest tighten. Missing time. Just like the victims. After that, Chen stopped investigating. He requested a transfer to white-collar crime, as far away from this pattern as he could get. When I asked him why he stopped, he said, because I realized that whatever this is, it doesn't want to be investigated. And the more you look into it, the more visible you become to it. To what? He wouldn't say. Just told me to drop it, to walk away while I still could. 2 years later, he died in a car accident on the GW Parkway. A single-vehicle collision, no other cars involved. The police report said he swerved suddenly, as if trying to avoid something in the road. But there was nothing there. Keene turned from the window and looked at me. The reason I'm telling you all this is because I need you to understand the risk. This isn't just an unsolved case. This is something that actively resists investigation. And investigators who get too close don't just fail to solve it. They become part of it. Are you saying there's a cover-up? I'm saying there's a pattern within the pattern. And the second pattern is what happens to people like us when we start seeing the first one too clearly. She walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out a list. These are all the investigators who've worked on these cases over the years. Local detectives, state police, federal agents. I tracked down what happened to each of them after their involvement. I took the list and started reading. There were 63 names, each one followed by notes about their current status or fate. 42 of them had either retired early or transferred to completely different divisions within 3 years of working one of these cases. The pattern was undeniable. Homicide detectives suddenly requesting reassignment to traffic division. FBI agents moving from violent crimes to financial fraud. State police investigators taking early retirement in their 40s. 8 had died. 6 in accidents, car crashes, falls, 1 drowning, 2 by suicide. The rest were still active in law enforcement but showed no further interest in the cases. Keene had noted next to several names, refused to discuss case when contacted, or became hostile when questioned about investigation. And then I saw it. One name on the list made me stop cold. Agent Richard Nolan, FBI, worked Hayes Case 1987. Transferred to Cybercrimes Division 1988. Currently, Supervisory Special Agent, BAU 5. My supervisor. The man who'd handed me this box of files. He'd worked one of these cases 37 years ago and had never mentioned it. "You see it," Keene said, watching my face. "My supervisor. He was on the Hayes case in Albuquerque. And 3 months after that case went cold, he requested a transfer to an entirely different division. He spent 15 years in cybercrimes before moving to the behavioral analysis unit. As far from homicide investigation as you can get while still staying with the Bureau. Why would he give me these files if he's trying to hide his involvement? Maybe he's not trying to hide it. Maybe he's testing you. Or maybe..." She hesitated. "Maybe he's hoping you'll succeed where he failed. Some of these investigators, they never stopped thinking about these cases. They just stopped actively working on them because they knew it was dangerous. But they remember. They still see the pattern." She pulled out one final folder and handed it to me. "I'm going to give you everything I have. All my research, all my files. Because I'm 73 years old and I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer, 6 months if I'm lucky. Ms. Keene, let me finish. I've kept this research secret for 25 years because I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if I went public with it. Afraid of ending up like Robert Chen. But I'm not afraid anymore. Death is coming for me regardless. And I'll be damned if I let these 41 victims stay forgotten because I was too much of a coward to do anything about it." She opened the folder and pulled out a thick document. "This is my insurance policy. Everything I know, compiled and ready for release. If anything happens to you, if you disappear or die under suspicious circumstances, this goes to 3 journalists I trust, 2 members of Congress, and the FBI director. It won't prove anything. I don't have enough hard evidence for that. But it will raise enough questions that someone will have to investigate properly." I took the document, feeling its weight. Hundreds of pages of research, interviews, analysis. Years of work that Keene had done alone, in secret, knowing it could never be officially acknowledged. "Why trust me with this?" I asked. "Because you're the 4th person to see the pattern clearly. And the first 3 either died, went crazy, or ran away. One of those options has to work eventually. Maybe you'll be the one who figures it out, or maybe you'll just live long enough to pass it on to the 5th person." As I was preparing to leave, she grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Agent Miller, one more thing. If you start experiencing missing time yourself, if you wake up somewhere with no memory of how you got there, if you start seeing things in your peripheral vision, stop immediately. Walk away from the investigation and don't look back, because that's what happened to me. When, 3 years ago, I was still working on this, trying to track down one more lead. I went to bed in my house in Virginia at around 11 p.m. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in my car on the side of a highway in West Virginia. It was 7 in the morning, 8 hours, just gone. No memory of driving there, no idea what I'd done during that time. Did you report it? To who? The bureau I'd already retired from? The local police who would have thought I was having a mental breakdown? I went to a doctor. He said it was probably a fugue state brought on by stress. Put me on medication and suggested I see a therapist, but I knew what it really was. What was it? I'd gotten too close. I'd made myself visible to whatever is doing this, and it wanted me to know that it was watching, that it could take my time just like it took the victim's time, that I was one step away from becoming number 42. She released my arm. So I stopped, compiled everything I had, locked it away, and waited for someone like you, someone who might have the resources and the courage to finish what I started. I drove back to D.C. in silence, Keen's files sitting in a box on my passenger seat. My mind was racing, trying to process everything I'd learned. 41 murders, 41 victims with missing time, and a pattern of investigators who either abandoned the case or ended up dead. I didn't confront my supervisor about his involvement in the Hayes case. Not yet. Instead, I spent the next week working quietly, comparing Keen's extensive research to the 15 files I'd been given. I was looking for any detail that might have been overlooked, any connection that could be proven rather than just suspected. What I found disturbed me more than I'd anticipated. Buried in the evidence logs of all 15 cases was a notation so brief I almost missed it. Personal effects collected from victim include 1 blank cassette tape, unlabeled, found in victim's possession. 15 victims, 15 cassette tapes, all listed as blank, all disposed of years ago during routine evidence purging. But the consistency was too perfect. Why would 15 murder victims, killed over a span of 25 years, all happen to be carrying blank cassette tapes? I called Keen to ask if she'd noticed this detail. I found the notations, she said, but by the time I started investigating, the tapes were already gone. However, I did find something in my research. In 3 of the cases, the forensic teams actually tried to analyze the tapes before they were purged. They ran them through audio enhancement equipment. And all 3 teams found the same thing. The tapes weren't completely blank. There was static, but not random static, patterned static, like something had been recorded but had degraded in an unusual way. One audio forensics specialist said it looked like the tapes had been exposed to a precisely calibrated magnetic field that erased certain frequencies while leaving others intact. He'd never seen anything like it. That's not something that happens naturally. No, it's not, which suggests someone deliberately tampered with the tapes. But why leave damaged recordings with the victims? What purpose does that serve? I didn't have an answer, but I was starting to think the tapes were connected to the missing time. Maybe the victims had recorded something during those unexplained hours. Maybe that's what got them killed. I decided to focus on the most recent case that matched the pattern. According to Keen's research, the last confirmed victim was Thomas Warren, killed in Phoenix, Arizona in March 2019, only 5 years ago. Recent enough that evidence might still exist. Recent enough that people might still remember. I pulled Warren's case file and read it carefully. Warren had been 53, an accountant, married with 2 adult children. He'd been found dead in his home office on March 17, 2019, from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. But the medical examiner had immediately flagged the case as suspicious. The angle of the wound was wrong for suicide. The gun had been wiped clean of fingerprints, and there were indications that the scene had been staged. Warren's wife told police he'd been acting strangely since returning from a business trip to Las Vegas 3 days earlier. Anxious, paranoid, checking the locks repeatedly, looking out windows like he expected to see someone watching the house. He'd been having trouble sleeping, waking up several times a night in a state of panic. His wife had assumed it was work stress. Warren had been preparing for a major audit and was under pressure. She'd suggested he take some time off, maybe see a therapist. He'd agreed, but had never made it to an appointment. I called the Phoenix Police Department and asked to speak with the detective who'd worked the case. His name was Richard Cole, and he sounded weary when I explained why I was calling. "The Warren case," he said. "Yeah, I remember it. Spent 6 months on that investigation and got nowhere. What's the FBI's interest after all this time?" "I'm reviewing a series of cases that might be connected. Pattern analysis. Can I ask you a few questions?" "Sure. Fire away." "Was there a cassette tape found with the body?" There was a pause. "How did you know that?" My pulse quickened. "It's part of the pattern I'm investigating. Was it analyzed?" "We sent it to our lab. They said it was blank, or at least nothing recoverable on it. We figured it was just something Warren had in his desk drawer, not relevant to the case." "Why? You think it matters?" "It might. Did Mrs. Warren mention her husband going anywhere during his Vegas trip that wasn't on his official itinerary?" Another pause, longer this time. "That's a very specific question, Agent Miller. What exactly are you looking for?" "I'm trying to establish whether Mr. Warren had any unexplained gaps in his travel schedule." "Actually, yeah. After he died, Mrs. Warren was going through his credit card statements for the estate. She found a charge from a motel in Boulder City on the Friday night of his trip. That's about 40 minutes southeast of Las Vegas. She called me because Warren hadn't mentioned going to Boulder City, and it wasn't anywhere near where his conference was being held." "Did you investigate?" "We called the motel. They confirmed Warren had checked in Friday evening around 8 p.m. and checked out Saturday morning around 6 a.m. But they didn't have any surveillance footage saved that far back, and the staff didn't remember him specifically. We tried to find out what he did while he was there, but there was nothing. No other credit card charges in Boulder City. No gas purchases. No restaurant receipts, just the motel room." "What about his behavior after he returned home?" "His wife said he was different, distracted. Kept saying he felt like someone had been in their house while they were sleeping, even though there was no evidence of a break-in. He'd get up multiple times during the night to check the doors and windows. On his last night alive, she woke up around 3 in the morning and found him standing at their bedroom window, just staring out at the dark street. When she asked what he was looking at, he said, 'They're still there. I can feel them watching.' She thought he was having some kind of breakdown." I wrote this down, my hand shaking slightly. The pattern was exact. Missing time in Boulder City. Paranoia upon returning home. Claims of being watched. Dead within 48 hours. "Agent Miller, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How many cases are in this pattern you're investigating?" I hesitated. 41 confirmed, possibly more. Jesus. And they all match Warren's case? "In significant ways. Yes." "Then whoever's doing this has been at it for a long time, decades, and we've never caught them?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." After I hung up with Cole, I spent several hours mapping the locations of all the victims' unexplained travel stops. Keene had already done some of this work, but I wanted to see if there were any geographic patterns she might have missed. What I found was both frustrating and revealing. The towns where victims had disappeared for those missing hours were scattered across the country with no obvious connection. Montana, Nevada, Florida, Washington, Ohio. No clear geographic center, no logical progression. But they all shared certain characteristics. They were all small towns, populations between 8,000 and 20,000. They were all within an hour's drive of a larger city where the victim was officially staying, and they were all, in their own way, unremarkable. The kind of places that don't attract attention. The kind of towns you pass through on the way to somewhere else. It was as if the victims had been drawn to these anonymous spaces, or directed there. I made a decision that I knew Keene would warn me against. I needed to visit one of these towns, to stand in the same place where a victim had lost time, to see if I could find anything that dozens of previous investigators had missed. I chose Boulder City because it was the most recent case, and because I could make the trip without raising too much suspicion. I told my supervisor I was taking a few days of personal time. I didn't mention where I was going. The flight to Las Vegas was uneventful. I rented a car at the airport and drove southeast through the desert, following the same route Thomas Warren had taken 5 years earlier. The landscape was stark and beautiful in a harsh way, endless sand and rock under a sky so blue it looked artificial. Boulder City appeared suddenly, a cluster of buildings rising from the desert like a mirage. Population 16,000, according to the sign at the town limits. It looked like any small American town, a main street with local businesses, residential neighborhoods spreading out in neat grids, a few churches, a library. I found the Desert Rose Motel without difficulty. It was a single-story building with a faded pink exterior, the kind of family-owned place that probably hadn't changed much since the 1980s. A neon sign advertised weekly rates and HBO. I parked in the small lot and went inside. The office smelled like coffee and old carpet. A woman in her 60s looked up from behind the counter, setting down a paperback novel. "Help you?" I showed her my credentials. "I'm investigating a guest who stayed here in March of 2019, Thomas Warren. Do you remember him?" She studied my badge carefully before answering. "I own the place with my husband. I'm here most nights. But 2019? That's 5 years ago. We get a lot of guests. What's this about?" "Mr. Warren died shortly after staying here. I'm trying to understand why he came to Boulder City and what he might have been doing." Her expression changed. "He died? I didn't know that. How?" "That's part of what I'm investigating. Do you keep guest registries from that time?" She pulled out an old ledger. Apparently the motel didn't use computer check-ins. She flipped through pages until she found the entry. March 15th, 2019. Room 7. Thomas Warren. Checked in 8:47 p.m., checked out 6:15 a.m. "Do you remember anything unusual about that night?" She thought about it, her finger still on the ledger entry. "Actually, yes. That was the night we had the power outage. Just our motel, too, which was strange. Rest of the street had power, but we were dark for about an hour." "What time?" "Started around midnight, came back on around 1. I had to give a few guests flashlights. They weren't happy about it." "Do you remember which room Mr. Warren stayed in?" "Says here room 7. That's down at the end, last room on the left. It's vacant right now if you want to see it." She grabbed a key and led me outside. Room 7 was indeed at the far end of the building, the most isolated room available. The door was weathered, the number painted in faded gold. She unlocked it and stepped aside. "Not much to see. It's been cleaned and rented probably 80 times since 2019. I stepped inside. Standard motel room. Queen bed with a floral comforter, small TV on a dresser, bathroom with dated fixtures, nothing remarkable. But as I stood there, I felt something. A presence. Like the air in the room was slightly wrong, slightly heavier than it should be. Was there anything unusual about Mr. Warren when he checked in? I asked. The owner leaned against the doorframe thinking. He seemed nervous, kept looking over his shoulder when he was signing the register. I asked if everything was okay, and he said he'd just gotten a bit turned around finding the motel, but he didn't seem lost. He seemed scared, like he was expecting someone to follow him in. Did he say anything else? Asked specifically for a room at the back of the building. Said he wanted somewhere quiet, away from the street. I gave him room 7. He seemed relieved. Were there any other guests that night? She consulted the ledger. A couple in room 3, and there was a man in room 9, that's right next door to 7, but he'd been staying with us for a few days already. Paid cash, kept to himself. Tall guy, wore dark clothes, never saw him much. My pulse quickened. Do you remember his name? Let me check. She flipped back a few pages. Here, J. Miller, that was it. No first name, just the initial. Paid cash for a week up front. That's unusual, isn't it? A little. But we get travelers who prefer cash. We don't ask questions as long as they pay. When did he check out? Same day as Mr. Warren, actually. Both left early Saturday morning. I remember because I was surprised to see 2 cars leaving the lot at the same time, around 6 a.m. I felt a chill despite the desert heat outside. Warren in room 7. A mysterious guest in room 9 right next door. Both leaving at the same time after a night when the power had mysteriously failed. Do you remember what this J. Miller looked like? Like I said, tall, maybe 6'3" or 6'4", always wore dark clothing, jeans, dark jacket. I only saw him clearly once or twice. He had a car with tinted windows, came and went at strange hours. Strange how? Late nights, early mornings. One night, might have been the same night Mr. Warren was here, I heard a car start around 3 in the morning. Looked out the office window and saw it was Miller's car. He drove off, came back, maybe an hour later. Did you see him leave the property that night? Just saw the car. Didn't see him walking to it or anything. But yeah, he definitely went somewhere in the middle of the night. I walked to the back of the room where a door led to a small patio area. Does this door lock from inside? Yeah, most guests don't even know it's there. We use the patio mostly for storage. Can I see outside? She unlocked the door. Beyond was a small concrete area with a storage shed, and beyond that, nothing but desert stretching to the horizon. The landscape was empty, silent except for the wind. As I stood there looking out at the vast emptiness, I felt it again. That sensation of being watched, of eyes on me, even though I could see nothing but sand and rock and distant mountains. I turned quickly. The motel owner was still standing in the doorway of room 7. She hadn't seen anything. You okay? She asked. You look pale. I'm fine, just the heat. But my hands were shaking. For just a second, less than a second, I'd seen someone standing at the corner of the building. A tall figure in dark clothing exactly matching the descriptions from the witness statements. Did you see something out there? She sounded concerned now. Thought I did. Probably just a shadow from the storage shed. But I knew it wasn't. And from the look on her face, I could tell she knew I was lying. I thanked her for her time and walked back to my rental car. My heart was pounding. I'd only been in Boulder City for an hour and I was already experiencing what previous investigators had described, the overwhelming sensation of being observed, the feeling that something was aware of my presence. I sat in my car for a few minutes trying to calm down. I told myself it was just the power of suggestion. Keen stories about investigators feeling watched had gotten into my head. I was seeing patterns where none existed, but the feeling didn't go away. I started the car and headed back toward Las Vegas. It was a 40-minute drive, straight shot on Highway 93. I left Boulder City at exactly 4:30 p.m. according to my dashboard clock. I remember the first 15 minutes of the drive clearly. Desert landscape, other cars passing, a semi-truck hauling supplies. I was thinking about Thomas Warren, about what he might have experienced in that motel room, about the mysterious J. Miller in room 9. Then, nothing. The next thing I knew, I was pulling into the Las Vegas airport rental return, and my clock read 7:15 p.m. I stared at it, confused. The drive should have taken 40 minutes. I'd lost almost 2 hours. I pulled over before returning the car and checked my phone. Same time, 7:15 p.m. I tried to remember the drive. I could recall leaving Boulder City, the first few miles of desert highway. But after that, there was simply nothing. A blank space where memory should be. I sat there in the parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to force myself to remember. But the harder I tried, the more the gap seemed to widen. It was like trying to recall a dream immediately after waking, the details slipping away as soon as you focused on them. I checked my body for any signs of injury. Nothing. My clothes were the same. My wallet and phone were where they should be, but nearly 2 hours of my life were just gone. This was it. This was what had happened to Robert Chen, to Margaret Keene, to every victim before they died. I'd lost time. My hands were still shaking as I reached for my jacket to get my phone and call Keene. That's when I felt it. Something in my inside pocket that hadn't been there before. I pulled it out slowly, already knowing what it would be. A cassette tape. No label. No case. Just an old-style tape. The kind that hadn't been common in decades, now sitting in my pocket like it had always been there. I stared at it, this impossible object. I hadn't put it there. I didn't even own a tape player. But during those 2 missing hours, someone, or something, had placed it in my jacket. Or I had done it myself and couldn't remember. I drove straight to the airport and caught the next available flight back to D.C. On the plane, I kept taking the tape out of my pocket, examining it, trying to find any clue about its origin or content, but it was completely blank. No markings, no indication of what might be recorded on it. When I landed at Dulles, I didn't go home. I drove straight to Margaret Keene's house. It was after midnight, but I knew she'd still be awake. People who are dying don't sleep much. She opened the door in a bathrobe, took one look at my face, and knew immediately that something had happened. "Come in," she said. "Tell me." I told her everything. Boulder City, the motel owner's story about J. Miller, the figure I'd seen at the corner of the building, and then the missing time, the 2 hours I couldn't account for. When I showed her the cassette tape, her face went pale. "You need to listen to it," she said, "right now." She led me to her office and pulled out an old tape player from her filing cabinet. I kept this specifically for cases like this, couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I inserted the tape with shaking hands and pressed play. Static, just like the other tapes, just like she'd warned me. But she'd been investigating this for 25 years. She knew what to do. I drove straight to Keene's house. She looked at the tape and went pale. "You need to listen to it." She ran it through enhancement software. Under the static, voices emerged. The first was mine. "I understand now. You've been showing me." Another voice, deep and layered. Multiple voices speaking as one. "You're one of the few who can understand. Most people see, but don't remember." My voice asked about the deaths. The other voice explained, "They don't die because they met us. They die because they can't reconcile what they've experienced with what they believe is possible. The cognitive dissonance breaks them." Near the end, my voice sounded afraid. "I don't want to forget this. You won't forget, not completely. We'll make sure you remember just enough to continue. When the pattern is complete, When all 41 pieces are in place, then you'll understand. I had no memory of this conversation. Keen rewound it. Listen to the background. Under the voice, breathing. Not one person, many. A chorus of breath in perfect rhythm. I flew to Phoenix and analyzed Warren's tape. Hidden below audible frequencies, I found voices. Thomas Warren, you've seen what you needed to see, but you can't tell them. If you tell them, they'll think you're insane. I can't forget what I saw. Your mind isn't equipped to hold that knowledge. It will break you. In 2 days, the cognitive dissonance will be too much. You'll make it stop the only way you can. You're saying I'm going to kill myself? You'll find the contradiction unbearable. What you know versus what society tells you is possible. They can't coexist. Something will break. It always does. Warren had tried to expose what he'd learned. 2 days later, someone killed him and staged it as suicide. My phone rang. Unknown number. The layered voice from my tape. You've been very thorough, Agent Miller. You know things your mind can't accept. In 36 hours, the cognitive dissonance will become unbearable. You have 3 choices: forget, die, or understand. I choose to expose you. That's what they all chose. And they all died. Because the evidence we leave is designed to be unbelievable. We exist in the gaps between what you can prove and what you know is true. You have 36 hours to decide. The line went dead. Keen gave me her insurance files. I'm dying, cancer, 6 months. If you're going to risk everything, I'll make sure it's not wasted. If you don't come back, I release everything. I had less than 30 hours. I drove back to Boulder City that night, arriving at 3:47 a.m. I parked at the Desert Rose and waited. At 4:52 a.m., reality shifted. The air changed, went out of focus. 7 figures stood in the desert 50 yards out. Tall, wrong proportions, faces I couldn't focus on. I walked toward them. I came back. We knew you would. You seek understanding, not exposure. What are you? We exist in the spaces you don't look, in the time you don't remember. We've always been here, parallel to you, documenting your progression. And the people who die? They couldn't integrate what they learned. We show them the larger reality, the pattern beyond normal perception, and most minds can't hold that information. The contradiction causes cognitive collapse. Show me the pattern. The lead figure extended what might have been a hand. I touched it. Reality fractured. I saw all of time simultaneously. Boulder City in 1985, 1997, 2015, 2024, layered together. I saw all 41 victims going through the same process. I saw the vast web connecting them, cause and effect spreading in all directions. Each death was the result of minds unable to hold incompatible information. I saw myself across all timelines. In my office, in a hospital bed decades ahead, ceased to exist. All versions simultaneously real, and I saw them, existing across all realities, observing and documenting. Not evil, simply observers at a level humans couldn't naturally access. You see now, I see. What do I do with this? Choose. You can explain it. They won't believe you. You can document it, hope the next person understands, or you can become like us. If I become like you, can I stop the pattern? You can't stop it. The pattern is inherent to consciousness encountering higher dimensions. But you can minimize it, guide potential victims away, intervene in subtle ways. I thought about the 41 victims, about Keen waiting, about the next person who would face this choice. Show me everything. The vision didn't end this time. My consciousness spread across time like water through cracks. I saw every case, every choice, every moment where victims could have walked away. I saw their deaths and the versions where they survived by forgetting. I saw the pattern, beautiful and terrifying. I saw how to minimize it, how to guide future investigators away before they saw too much. My body stood in the desert, but my consciousness was everywhere and every when. I was no longer just Agent David Miller. I was an observer, a documenter, a node in the pattern. Welcome. You've made the choice no one before you has made. Part of you will exist in linear time. Part will exist here in the pattern. You'll experience both realities. I felt myself separating. One version remained merged with the figures, existing across time. Another walked back to the car, drove to Las Vegas, caught a flight home. Both versions equally real,